wasn't any issue when we tested earlier, so I don't think there will be an issue now.
Yeah.
At least I hope so.
Asian had a problem, namely, earlier.
Yeah, I'm too loud.
Yeah, I mean, he has a lot of problems, mentally speaking.
I'm gonna start again.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Thin Ice Club podcast. We are a group of weebs and we'll be talking about Kyousougiga. First off, we'll be starting off with introducing ourselves. I'm Grohe, your host for today. I'm Danish, and my favorite anime is Kimi no Naiwa. Asian, go ahead.
I'm Asian. You can call me Aiden. I'm not a weeb because I'm half Japanese, and I live in the United States though. And my favorite anime is probably Hibiki Euphonium.
Rika?
I will be called Rika for the purpose of this podcast. I'm also American, and my favorite anime probably gonna have to be, I'll say, Clannad After Story.
I'm Thor, I'm German, and my favorite anime is Inferno Cop.
So Kyousougiga is a fantasy sci-fi-ish anime made in October 2013. It's a one-core anime, 10 episodes, and it's been directed by Rie Matsumoto. Let's just go ahead and start with our initial thoughts. I didn't like it much at all. I thought it was nonsensical alongside it. I thought it was interesting, and I gave it a 3. Asian, go ahead.
I totally disagree with that. Like, I personally found it to be not necessarily linear, but I found it to be understandable and comprehensible. And a lot of it made sense to me because I've seen it twice now, and I gave it an 8 overall.
No, actually, I'm pretty sure you gave it a 9 when I last checked.
No, it's an 8.
No, it's an 8.
Or did you update it?
Looks like it got worse in the rewatch.
I've been jumping around with scores. It was an 8, then it was a 9, then I put it back to an 8.
Alright.
I thought that the story was a little bit opaque in the way that it presented itself. A lot of the things that happen don't really follow a logical progression, so I kind of agree with Gruhe on that, but at the same time, I think that the story as a whole does make sense. I think it's a pretty simple story, and I think it's, you know, of course, really visually stunning and all, which is a very important aspect, but overall, I think I gave it a 5 because it didn't really grip me like other anime have.
Four, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say that I really love the visual directing in the show alone. I think it's an absolutely gorgeous show, and I also think it is accompanied by a great score. But I have to lean on the more negative side as far as the narrative is concerned, because I think that the show often sacrifices its narrative cohesion and continuity for the sake of thematic cohesion and continuity, which in turn leads to the circumstance that its themes are very consistent and represented in the characters, and I appreciate the themes, but I don't really feel that they are highlighted by the narrative, and rather that they are devalued by the narrative in the sense because it is sacrificed. I also think that the show had rather middling character drama that was not too strong, and that I didn't feel a lot for. That's everything.
I actually felt, I'm going to go off of that and start us off. I actually felt that the the more narrative aspects of the show connected, though not necessarily very openly, to the actual artistic styles of the show. A lot of the ideas and messages presented in the show narratively actually adjust and mingle with the visual aspects of the show. Probably the first and biggest of such that we were actually talking about before this podcast would be why Koto the rabbit gets sent to the moon. And this is both something that was narratively confusing for a lot of people and something that might have been visually confusing, but it was visually nice. And the reason that I found, or I believe, why she was sent to the moon is primarily going off of Buddhist culture, where a rabbit at one point in time offered its body to a starving man. I believe he was a wandering monk of sorts in Buddhist religion, who turned out to be the Sakura. I hope I pronounced that right, which is basically the Buddhist god of the Buddhist heaven. And now Sakura was touched emotionally by the rabbit's kindness, and yeah, and he put its likeness on the moon. And so Koto the rabbit is partly based off of this idea, and because she gave birth to the other Koto, she's weak, and she was sent to the moon, which is the holy place for the organization. I forget the name.
The shrine, I think.
The shrine, thank you. And she's sent there for whatever reason, which is the shrine's holy place at the same time. So in a way, she is sent to the Buddhist heaven to be
To make mochi, right?
to
That's what they do.
no.
The rabbits on the moon making mochi.
I think that's Japanese. I'm not sure. I'm not very good with religions, specifically Japanese religions, but that's basically what it is to me.
Anyway,
she was
in the
sent there-
beginning, narratively, she stated that she would help him form this family in this other plane. But at the same time, she was only given this form by the Buddha temporarily, and she wasn't allowed to. It was only to express her love, and she wasn't allowed to stay in this form. So
Well,
she
she was
knew,
supposed to save him, right, in some way.
yeah, she's supposed to save him, and she knew that she wouldn't be able to stay. She would eventually have to leave. So that's why she eventually went to the moon.
Maybe this is a bit
Yeah.
late, but maybe we should try and introduce the show better. So, okay,
Well, I don't think this discussion is aimed at the uninitiated, so I don't
that's
think
fair.
necessary.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Honesty.
I guess. Sorry,
So,
guys.
But since we're at this, I'd like to delve into the narrative aspect a bit further. So let's discuss why did Koto and in turn Inari have to leave in the first place?
Okay, so if you go back to, I think it was episode 2 or 3, where Koto is, once they're in the Looking Glass City, Koto was having these nightmares, and what she's seeing is, because she's the god, basically, of the Looking Glass City. She was created as kind of the god of this world, of the 13th plane, and she's having these visions because she's the god, and so she can see the future and the past. So she's having these visions of, if she stays, the world will be destroyed. And so she determines that she must leave to therefore save the world.
Yeah, that is understandable. The question is why is this that way in the first place? I get that she has the visions and that she acts upon these visions in her act of leaving. The question is, what is the reason for these visions? Why do these visions occur?
I think that's actually episode 1, because episode 2 is about small Koto's relationship with her sensei, and episode 3 is about Kurama.
Like, the show has this interesting structure wherein there are like 5 world-building episodes, where the first episode just introduces the whole backstory. The second episode is about Koto. The third episode is about Kurama. The fourth episode about Yase. And the 5th episode about Myoe. And then there are like 5 plot episodes at the end.
Yeah.
So there are like 5 world-building episodes and 5 plot episodes. And for me, like, the world-building episodes were a bit fun and kind of charming, and I thought the plot episodes were really bad. So that's kind of like how I see the show.
It kind of reminds me of Flip Flappers, in a way, mainly because of that technical aspect where they introduced with Kurama, all of it kind of having a sort of magical notion to it. So, like, even though it was very technical, at the same time, it kind of operated at plot convenience that they were able to do, whatever, and you didn't really know the entire aspects of what Kurama had laid out. So that kind of reminded me of Flip Flappers, how they spent all these episodes telling these nice stories to build up the world, and then they kind of condensed all the plot into the second half, where they started addressing the issues that they introduced in the first 5 episodes. But at the same time, I thought it was very confusing, just like in Flip Flappers.
Yeah. So let me try to answer. So the question is, why do these visions occur? So, and when we look later into the show, then we see, right? We see that these visions seem to take place, that what she envisioned seems to actually happen when the world is about to get destroyed. Though this, of course, then gets subverted by the actions of our characters.
Yeah.
But we do have a nigh apocalypse towards the climax of the show.
Well,
And
it's like...
Yeah,
Sorry.
go first.
So at first it's like the Looking Glass City will be destroyed, this paradise will be destroyed. But then what actually happens is that's the only thing that gets saved, and everything else, all the other 12 planes get wrecked.
Yeah.
No, they all survive in the end.
Yeah,
No,
the
like
next
we
one.
see this scene where they're burning at the end. In episode 10.
No.
But,
'Cause
yeah, but the thing is that when we see why this near apocalypse happens and we go back to the cause and we see that this all started only because Koto, the small Koto, the kid Koto, went to the mirror world, right? This is what
Yes.
initiated all this. So, but Kid Koto in turn only got created once the Lady Koto and Inari left the mirror world already. She didn't exist at the point when they were in the world. So the issue now here is that she got visions of something that only happened because of something that happened because she left the city due to her visions. Which means we're dealing with a circular construct here.
So some sort
Yeah,
of other calamity would have happened, assumedly, had she not left.
Well, you can say that the visions occurred because she returned, not because she left. And in a way, if she hadn't left, they would have happened anyway, supposedly.
Well, the visions actually occurred because Koto returned. Because Koto forced her way in. She used her hammer on the paper to get in. Because the only real key is her mother, the older Koto.
But that
And by
wouldn't have
doing
happened if she never left.
In a sense, something else devastating most likely would have happened because of
Right.
her body. Her physical form was supposed to be returned to the Bodhisattva. I think it's something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bodhisattva.
You're right.
That's a Buddhist
Her
also,
body-
yeah.
Yes.
That's the explanation she actually gives in the episode, that she says that her body was only lent by the Bodhisattva till her feelings get returned, and that she overstayed her welcome in that body, so to say. And that is why she's going. But that leaves the question why she still occupies that body when we later see her in the sanctuary. Why did she not give up that body upon leaving the mirror world if that was the only reason to leaving the mirror world?
Yeah,
It
wouldn't it be a
wasn't-
more utilitarian solution if she had just given up her body and then stayed as a rabbit with her children and her husband?
In a sense, she did. Because she did. Because if you go back to the episode where it's building the relationship between Inari and the young Kodo, she is depicted as a rabbit because the only place where she can exist as something other than the rabbit is on the moon at that point in time because she's rebuilding her strength. And this is because the moon is the holy place for the shrine, and the shrine is kind of like the god of the world, the gods of the world. And because of this, they kind of step outside of the rules of the world. So while she didn't necessarily return the body, she didn't have to because of her positioning in the universe, which is at the shrine's holy space, the moon.
So I don't recall the moon ever being mentioned in the show. And we also don't
It
get
is
any
the
like
moon.
moon landscapes of the sort that you'd see in space
Yeah.
movies.
It is the place they called the sanctuary, if I recall correctly.
The holy place
Yeah,
or something like
it's
that.
the moon.
Well,
Yeah,
it's a matter of
They
interpretation whether or
never
not it's the moon,
explicitly
but
refer to it as the moon?
I don't think
I don't
they...
believe they did.
no, they did. They didn't. I'm pretty sure of that. So you can interpret it as the moon. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But that's just not. That's a massive interpretation.
Yeah.
I interpret it that way for several reasons. First off, the way it's depicted as
Yeah, I
orbiting
don't...
the Earth, because you see it orbiting the Earth. The dirt there, aside from the plants, if you were to take all the plants and structures out, it would have been similar to the moonscape with the gray, dusty sand with the craters.
Yeah,
And also
definitely.
because it goes with the idea of the rabbit in the moon, which connects it to Buddhist and I believe Shinto mythos.
Yeah, right. So I don't think that's a far-fetched interpretation.
No, it's fine.
I do kind of want to rewatch episode 6, just that part of episode 6, to see how much the landscape resembled the moon, because I didn't really feel like it looked like the moon.
Like for me, it was just in outer space where they met. I don't know if that was episode 6 or episode 7,
Oh.
but where Kodo meets Kodo. That's
I
just in
think-
outer space. They don't like land somewhere and then hug and then go back.
No,
I think it's most obvious in these really cool shots from episode 10. Let me-
yeah, it is. That's where it really hits home. So, with the
There also was
angles,
the
we're not gonna-
flowers there though and shit.
Yeah, that's because it's that's more of a I forget what the flowers mean. I'm sure because the show uses flowers. That's one of the few things I didn't get because I'm no expert on flowers. But the flowers represent things, and I'm pretty sure those flowers, because those flowers appear within the world of the Looking Glass City as well as in the quote unquote real world. But I don't remember what they mean.
Well, I mean, look
But
at what
that's-
flowers represent. Flowers represent the bloom, right?
Although it's those
So-
specific flowers.
Yeah,
Oh, you're
yeah,
right.
it's specific flowers, so I'm not
Yes.
sure about this, but generally flowers
Yeah,
represent bloom. I think that can be interpreted as part of a valid reading in terms of the death and rebirth thing going on.
Yeah.
But the larger issue at hand here is still that That you say she retained her body because she went to the moon and
Koto.
only to the moon. Yeah,
That's my
Lady Koto.
interpretation. Because when you
Yeah.
see her off the moon in anywhere other than the 13th plane towards the later episodes, she doesn't appear in the body of the Bodhisattva. She appears as a rabbit, as a black rabbit, just like her initial form.
Is that at any other point in time than in the flashbacks with the young Koto? Because I don't remember any other instance.
Flashbacks with the young Koto.
In
The one with
episode
Inari.
two, that is.
Um,
Yeah,
no,
episode
no,
2.
in the episode where she's, I think that's with the young Koto. Yeah. That's the only time it occurs outside of the initial beginnings of the story.
So
Is when in that room.
they mentioned at one point that she can't like survive outside of the holy place, if you're the moon.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that is why she continues to fade away, so to say.
Yeah.
Like, why she literally fades away.
That's because she gave most of her power when they had their biological child.
You know, it's
Um,
because she can't exist in the place. That's the reason stated in the show itself.
Yeah, it's because of the child that they had.
Yeah, well, that's why she's weak, but the reason, and that's also why she's confined in the sanctuary. Yes.
Yes.
Like here. You see that she's getting very transparent.
Yes, she becomes
Yeah,
more and
yeah,
more
yeah.
transparent because she spent time outside of the moon in the city of the Looking Glass, and that's why she was transparent even on the moon. Even though when they first met her on the moon, she was not transparent.
Yeah,
And
she
as time
wasn't,
goes
right?
on, yeah, which is why she's still transparent.
But
At
that
that
makes the question why the Buddha would be okay with this. I mean, the Buddha still has nothing from its body, the Bodhisattva, pardon me.
That
if,
one I don't know.
If the body is on the moon, right?
Maybe she's like hiding from the Buddhist water or something.
Well, I think it's
And that
if
would be very
anything,
far-fetched.
the closest I think I can get with anything, without being extremely far fetched, is that the Bodhisattva is basically someone who's reached enlightenment, and so they're kind of at peace with the world. And so what the Bodhisattva is trying to do, this is just an interpretation, mind you, is bringing them together and keeping them together. So I feel like the Bodhisattva doesn't really mind if she continues to use the body, as her purpose was, as I think it was Rika mentioned, saving Mioe, the older Mioe.
Yeah.
And which doesn't happen until the very end of the series. So we'd have to have a continuation of that to see if the Bodhisattva actually comes and reclaims the body that it once had. Though I doubt it would, based on the way this story ended.
Yeah, but then it doesn't matter either way.
Yes. So
But they mentioned
I'll
in
give
the
you that one.
they mentioned in the episode where they leave the Looking Glass City that she has to give it back, but she's postponing it. But it's something that she has to do. It's not
Yes.
that the Buddha is reclaiming it somehow.
Yeah.
So
The real question here now would also be, if her intent is to go and deliver the body back to the Bodhisattva, why would she instead evacuate to the moon? I mean, if she's not with her family, she obviously wouldn't have much from her body. I don't think that being in solitude on the moon is something she particularly longed for, right?
I don't think she was necessarily alone, though. I mean, she
well, I
bore...
mean, she's alone in the sense that she's separated from the one she loves.
But at the same time, I'm not sure if that's entirely true, because she bore Inari's child, and
Yeah.
So Inari was obviously there at one point because it's a biological child, and for another period of time she had Koto to herself, the young Koto, and then Inari came and claimed her. So how long and she was actually alone on the moon is unknown to me. And also similarly, if you look at the shrine's main gathering point, that seems to be in a somewhat similar location up in most likely space, in a lot of scenes, which I thought was interesting. So she might not necessarily be alone, as the gathering place for the shrine is the holy place, which is the moon, or that general location.
And there are no like moon-like landscapes in the places where we see all the shrine people.
It's true. They're on a floating platform of sorts.
Yeah, something like that, space station or something. I don't know. But that's true. There are like
But
a lot of
then-
things like unexplained when it comes to how exactly Kodo was burned. Little Kodo was born.
Yeah.
We don't
Well,
really know.
with the going off your comment about it looked like a space station, there was a space station at the moon.
Like in the background.
No. They mention it because when the young Kodo broke through the shrine, I'm not. Yeah, through the glass of the holy shrine, the shrine's holy place, which is the moon. They commented that she destroyed their, I believe, satellite, which could be considered that space station, and that she destroyed it with her hammer. Which might be that location, though. That's somewhat far fetched, and it's just speculation.
I feel like the show pulls like the show like kind of almost contradicts itself because so the world starts falling apart after episode 6, where Koto has been out in space and gotten the mother back. Then the world starts falling apart slowly after that. But then we're later on told that what actually triggered this world falling apart thing is when she entered the place in episode 2. So it's kind of like, at first we are led to believe, because like chronologically it will make sense that it was her going out and getting the mother that would lead it to it. But it's not actually what the story tells us. I feel that's kind of like a bait and switch there.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was kind of taking steps. The first step in the process was when she forced her way into the Looking Glass City, which then
if you go by that, then you could say that the thing that triggered the world to be destroyed was whenever the mother left in the first place.
Well, if you want to go,
that didn't damage the seal, obviously.
No.
Yeah.
It didn't damage the seal.
But by what Aiden is saying is that.
In a sense, yes.
I
get what you're coming from. Yeah.
But at the same time, if you're saying that, then you can take it one step further and say that that was the first step.
Yeah.
You can say the place being created in the first place, the first step towards its destruction. I mean, as soon as you're born, you start dying.
I mean, yeah, obviously, but it's the first step to getting inevitably destructed at one point, but it's not the first step in the actual process of gradual descent towards destruction, right?
Yeah.
That first step, the initiation of the active destruction process and not of the destiny to be destructed at indefinite point in time.
Yeah.
That starting point was when Koto entered the world. But the issue I think Gru is trying to point out here is that we don't really see any gradual development to that, but instead we actually don't see anything happening, and then we get it shown later on in the show. And very drastically at that.
Yeah, I consider it a plot hole, basically.
With no apparent second trigger. Like, it very abruptly and extremely starts falling apart. Like, it doesn't really happen gradually at all. It all suddenly starts collapsing, even though Koto has been there for a sufficient amount of time, at least.
Yeah, for like a year or something.
At least weeks, at the very least.
No, but it's been 9 months, I'm quite sure.
Yeah, it was a good amount of time.
Yeah, it was a good amount of time. I don't think we really have any definite sense of time here. And
well, they kept on saying like this time of year as if it was like a season passing.
It was kind of like a season passing. That I don't believe that location, the Looking Glass City necessarily has seasons. I don't believe it does, but instead they measure time based on certain events such as the
station opening and so on.
Yeah.
We spoke about space station earlier too. Like that's the station opening, right?
I don't believe so. No, I believe that's the shrine station.
Yeah, we don't really know what the station refers to, right?
Yeah.
This was a problem here of like, what does the Japanese word for station refer to, and what can it refer to, and what can't it refer to, and so on.
Well, I think it's the station itself is more of a. Oh, I can hear myself.
We can.
Not an.
Yeah, I can hear his echo.
Yeah. All right.
How about now?
No, I can't. No, but. The station itself kind of represents a cycle where the old leaves and the new comes in, except nothing new is coming in, which is why Myoe is waiting at that station. They relate him to Hachiko, waiting at the station for his master. He's waiting at the station for either his father or someone new to return, and nobody's returning to the station, which kind of represents stagnation within the Looking Glass City, as nothing changes really. Though the one interesting thing that I want to point out is the character Fushimi, who is it's never explained how he got there, though you can assume he contributed a lot to the creation of what is the Looking Glass City at the beginning of the show, as he works for the shrine.
You're talking about one of the elder son's lackeys.
Yes. The one who has the glasses.
Right, and who put a GPS on the remote control.
Yes.
So, yes.
Yes. I think he's an interesting character. And I'd like to actually stem off and to go on a bit of a tangent about the colors represented in the world, and specifically on the characters, which the three primary colors are black, red, and white. And I was reading through an interview with, I believe it's Matsumoto, the director. Yeah, Matsumoto.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about how he used three very specific colors um, within the show, black, white, and red. And he commented that red is the color of blood and therefore the color of humanity, which is why he tried to put it on all the characters in some way, shape, or form to represent their humanity. It's why both Kotos have red eyes, why the ponytail is held by a red tie, why the character.
Ironically, I think that the red eyes of Koto and her father and also of the rabbit make them look distinctly inhuman.
And also, like, Yase is also wearing a red dress all the time, but she's a
Yeah,
demon,
and
right?
the adopted son has blue eyes, which makes him look more human.
Yeah.
This is my interpretation.
No, I can see where you're coming from, but I think it's interesting because while you can make that connection, both Myoes are more connected to me than most other characters. If you go back to ancient Japanese time and the period when this was taking place, what normally happened is a son would take on his father's name when he was inheriting his business. So when Inari passes on the title of Myoe to his son, he's basically telling him you're taking over the business, which is interesting because they're immortal, and normally that happens when the father dies. And I think they're also more like in more circumstances because they both somewhat seek the same thing. They both seek their own destruction. Inari seeks that destruction by passing on his spirit to his offspring, whereas Myoe seeks that because he just desires death, as he was dead before. And that's just an interesting take because the shown as complete opposites with the red versus blue eyes, and one is the son, one is the father, but at the same time they seek the same thing, which is the relinquishment of their power and the the demise, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And then
and then going back to the colors, the colors I wanted to focus on the most are black and white, which is kind of used to reflect balance. If you look in the opening, they have a picture of Koto, the mother, and Inari in a circle, which, to me at least, represented the kind of like yin and yang, the balance in the world.
Yin and yang, definitely. Black and white definitely makes me think of yin and yang.
Yeah. And going off that interview, according to Matsumoto, black was representative of people hiding their emotions and their feelings, and white represents the goodness and sincerity a person has. And I thought that was interesting when Koto fights or argues with the chief priest. She takes off her black sweatshirt, her black sweatshirt, top, whatever, and it's all white, which shows that she has shed the emotions that she was once hiding, and she's going to be true to herself. She's going to be sincere and honest with her emotions, and I thought that was an extremely interesting scene, as she's getting rid of her repressed emotions and she's putting them up front, and that the speech and discussions they had after that were very emotional and honest. And I also thought it was interesting that the chief priest himself and those members of the shrine, all except Fushimi, wore complete white outfits to represent that they're honest with themselves and they're upfront and they live true to what they say and what they do.
Yeah, okay. I mean, there's definitely a turning point in episode 9 where they decided to be more transparent about everything, and there's that giant, basically, exposition dump by Mioe Sr., what was his name? Inari?
Yeah.
Inari.
Yeah, walking with his daughter before he stabbed her or whatever.
Yeah, that was weird for me.
Yeah, that was also weird for me.
So can you explain that, the thing where he goes on with his sword and twists him in people's body and...
If we're gonna talk about the plot, we should probably go back to some early instances, because I still have things I would like to...
Alright, fine. So how about episode 6, what we were talking about earlier? Should we start with that? Wherein she bashes the big robot thing, and then she's sent out into outer space somehow?
Yeah, but that's too bad. But I think we can go back even further.
Okay.
I was bothered by one thing since the very first episode, and that thing never really got explained. So the very simple question I have, and I hope there is an answer, I just can't think of one, is why did Inari and Koto get banished in the first place from the real world by the shrine?
I wouldn't say they were necessarily banished as in
Yeah,
a
I don't think they
literal
were banished
sense.
either.
They got an official notice.
Well, no. The problem was that Inari is the god of creation. And if you go back to the ending, it's described that Inari basically shirked on his duties and he stopped doing them properly. And to escape this, because the shrine wanted him to continue his duties, he decided to escape to his own world of his own creation. He decided to relocate his family because they basically said you can't have these people in your family because they're fake. You're not a human. And so he decided to relocate his family in an attempt to continue their normalcy to the Looking Glass City, which is why they left. They weren't banished per se, but they were forced to leave, else they would face imminent destruction.
Well, it starts off with them being in this.
Forced to leave.
Well, it starts off with them with Miaoi being in the city, and people basically worried that something bad might happen. So he goes out to the mountains, and then the explanation they give for sending him the note of going away is that he ruined their honor somehow. Yes,
he ruined their honor by creating this family, as he tried to be human when in reality he was a god.
Is that really, like, I don't know. I don't see any argument for this thing.
I see it as kind of, gods are separate from humans. They exist on different planes, in different worlds. But by giving himself a family and trying to become a human, he is lowering himself and his status, and therefore the status of the shrine and his family, which would be the shrine's the chief priest, and God, which is their father. And he's lowering their standing in the world as he lowers his own. And so they wanted him to get rid of his family and stop trying to be human.
Yeah, so the issue they have with him is, as they put it at least, is that he apparently ruins their reputation.
Yes.
They also talk about, like, not following his role or whatever.
Yes.
That his role was to be an observer.
Yes. So then the question arises, how is he the god of creation and just an observer at the same time?
Yeah. But I think that it is that he makes life and then life takes over, and then once life has taken over, he's just supposed to, like, sit back and not do much.
Yeah.
It's partly that.
God of creation, not the god of. No, he's not the judge of creation.
Maybe it's just something that's lost in translation, but it seems kind of weird linguistically to be an observer when you have an actual job of creating things.
Well, it's mentioned later on in the story that he was creating things, but at one point that creation itself took over, and they started reproducing on their own and creating new things. And so that, and this is maybe a bit of a jump, but my assumption is that when they started doing this, he started to try to become human. And when he started creating a family, the shrine itself said, look, man, you've got to stop because you are basically lowering our status as beings. And by lowering our status, we're going to take away the privilege you have of creating things. And therefore, you are now an observer because you're a mortal and you're a god. But you cannot use the power you have as a god to create new things.
Like,
no, that can't be it, because he still has his power, as he evidently passed the power on to his son.
Yeah, but they basically said we don't want you to create more things, which is why they were going to destroy the 13th plane, because he created it against their will, against his job as an observer at that point in time.
I mean, God and the other son doesn't feel like capricious individuals to me. They seem pretty chill. I don't feel like they're the sort of people that would do that.
They were going to destroy the 13th plane because the 13th plane, it's kind of a battle of morality, right? You sacrifice, you let people live in one area, but you kill all of the population on every plane, or you destroy the one plane and you save the rest because the planes are inherently connected together.
Yeah, that's the explanation they give.
Well, the explanation they give is that the Looking Glass City is somehow connected to all the other 12 planes, and it somehow poses a threat to all the other planes.
Yes, because the Looking Glass City is a relatively unbalanced location, which is why when the planet started crashing down after they broke through in and out multiple times of the city without the key, which is the mother Kodo, it started to become unbalanced and it started to fall apart. And if it fell apart, all of the other planes would fall apart and face the same destruction it faced.
Yeah, I think it's a yin and yang thing.
Yeah, it's a yin yang thing.
So then that actually works. I'm satisfied with that.
I mean, for me, it's like even if that interpretation is true, I still feel that the show does an awful job of explaining it, and it's still a mark against the show.
Yeah, no, I think I'm fine with the explanation of why Mue had to leave. That's the part.
I still don't think this honor thing is very like. I think it's just a throwaway line. I don't think there's any explanation for it.
I do. I mean, this is based on a very.
It's kind of like the initial premise. Like the show just kind of starts with the initial premise of, well, this guy got banished and this is what's happening.
Yeah, I agree, but there's no explanation as to why.
Yeah, because it's the initial premise.
Yeah,
right,
but,
I agree.
But the thing is that they try to rationalize it. The question of whether they succeed. I mean, it's a different thing when they start with the premise that this guy had already left, and we only see him after he left, and then it never gets explained why he left. But we actually see him before he left, while he left, and after he left, and thus it is supposed to fill the gaps.
It's also the only time that this concept of honor is brought up in the entire show.
Well, I mean, it is because the show itself is about a mingling of ideologies. It's a mingling kind of past and present ideologies. Because if you go back to when he was quote unquote banished, you see that in this period of Japanese history, honor was one of the biggest factors of life. They had samurai who lived by Bushido, which is a code of honor. They had, certain codes of honors that they followed. And he broke the code of honor that he was supposed to live by, and therefore, kind of like, if someone dishonors the name of their family in Japan, ancient Japan, it dishonors not only themselves but the rest of their family.
There's none of that in the show. I mean, that's fine as an interpretation, but that's basically like fan theory. Like the show doesn't explain any of that.
I don't think the show wants to explain any of that. It wants to leave it up to fan
that's
theory.
fine, but like if I'm saying that the show doesn't explain itself and that's a mark against the show, then this interpretation doesn't deal with that problem.
I guess, but I mean, I feel like there are types of interpretation like this one where you can base it and you can go back and say, here's textual evidence that somewhat supports this. For example, the ideologies of the families and how Koto, the child, brings these new ideologies into the family and kind of forces it upon themselves. Because both Myoes were doing what they were doing for their honor and their family and not for themselves, and they were doing it out of obligation. And she shows them that they should be doing it out of love and emotion and care for each other, which is a newer ideology, which isn't necessarily the ideology at the time when the show takes place. And that kind of supports this because it's going back to they're doing this for honor. Everything they've done in the past is for honor and for family and for obligation. And Koto's bringing in this idea of, new concepts and new ideologies from a more modern time.
I mean, honor is only mentioned once in the entire show, which is when they say there's a reason for banishing him. That's it. That's the only time it's mentioned.
No, they don't actually mention they mention reputation.
No. I mean, like in my translation, it says honor.
Okay, in mine it says reputation.
Okay.
Lost in translation.
Yeah.
So but the thing is, I don't necessarily think that Koto is the only catalyst for this, because when we look back at Myoe, the new one, I think his turning point is actually not necessarily related to Koto, but his turning point is in episode 9, if I recall correctly, when he hides with his siblings, and they convince him to actually live for himself and make decisions for himself. And I think that is his turning point, because after that is when he runs and seeks out and reaches out to Koto, and then decides to turn against, well, essentially the fate at that moment. Because if you look back at the show before that, in episode 6, when he is on the cornfield with Koto, he actively pledges for her to kill him, right?
Yes.
which is very much not living for himself, which is still being caught up in his past life.
Yeah, no, I think it.
Yeah, go
Sorry.
ahead.
No, you can go.
No, I said everything.
Okay, so I feel like um, that wasn't actually his turning point. It was the point where he was finally pushed over the edge, but his turning point itself begins when Koto sheds by shedding her coat, her suppressed emotions and lets it all loose. And his reaction to that when he like punches her and says, aren't you supposed to save us and whatnot, and like you have a deal with me. And that's when I think it hits him that she's doing this not out of obligation, but because of the emotions she feels towards those she loves and cares about. And he's contemplating that when Kuramaru, I don't remember his name, has that discussion with him in that cave, and they pushes open the light so that the light shines in on him, and he sees, you could say, the light. And that's when he's finally pushed over the edge, but I believe it begins much earlier than that discussion and that conversation. And sorry.
So then, on to the next question. Then, why did Koto arrive in the mirror world in the first place?
The young one or the mother?
The young one, of course.
She was seeking answers, or that's my interpretation. She was seeking not who her mother was, but her history, her family's past. Because it said that her father basically didn't tell her anything. She had come to the conclusion that the rabbit was her mother and sought the location of her mother. She went to the looking glass looking for her mother, which is directly stated several times within the anime.
But like the more direct details of how can she go there when no one else can, other than the fact that she has the hammer, we don't really know.
No, that's very obvious because she has the hammer, and the
Yeah.
hammer
Yeah.
has the unique power that it transcends the barrier and the properties within the mirror world, as indicated by the things that are broken by her hammer not repairing, unlike
Right.
other things inside that dimension. And that is directly linked to the fact that she inherited the power from her mother. So
Yeah.
it makes sense that she is the only one with the capability to go into that world. The question is, why would she, without knowing of that world, randomly decide to smash some paintings on a wall with her hammer, which magically leads to her falling into that world?
Like that's my point. That how did she find it?
I think.
Well, not only how did she find it, but also how did she think of just randomly smashing this wall? I mean, that's not something you normally do, right?
Granted, she does smash a lot of things.
Fair voice.
But she wouldn't know that her hammer is intrinsically linked with being able to find her mother.
Maybe it was just like an average day of smashing things, and then all of a sudden she's in a
Yeah.
different world. Maybe that happens.
But doesn't she state herself that her purpose of coming to this world was looking for her mother?
Yeah,
It is.
no, she said she's looking for a guardian, actually.
That's what she said,
well,
guardian.
still.
But later on, when in the flashbacks, we hear she wants to find her mother, right?
Yes.
And she says she hopes her mother is beautiful and so on.
Well,
Yeah, right.
there is
So
an
the
explanation.
question is, how did she think of this? Because this makes it very much clear that this was intentionally done. She intentionally
Yes.
smashed it while and intentionally arrived. It was not just a random day of smashing things.
No,
Because
there's a
then
reason.
she herself would be lost upon arriving there and not clearly stating her goal as to why she came.
There's a reason for this. Both, I think, there's an artistic one and a physically narrative logical one. The logical one is that if you go back, she's walked in and seen this black rabbit several times emanate from the painting on the wall, and on the opposite wall of that is the Looking Glass City. So it's in basically Koto, or the image of Koto, her mother, is looking at both Inari, the chair he sleeps in, and behind him, the city through the looking glass. And she's looking at this, and one could logically draw the conclusion when she figured out that this rabbit was most likely her mother, or at least her guardian, that the city she was looking upon is the city that she owns. And Koto might have logically drawn the conclusion. This part's a bit of interpretation, but she might have logically drawn the conclusion that because the hammer is basically made out of Inari's heart. And she had the little plate, which is kind of like the key to the city of the looking glass, as well as Koto's blood, which might have, this is this part's stretching out there, but drawn into that city. But yeah, I know that's out there, but so basically she figured out that if this painting is her mother, then the other painting she's looking at must exist somehow, just like the rabbit. And her father's not telling her about it, so she probably used the hammer, which is her father's heart, to try to access the city, and successfully did so.
Like, what I would say is that the show just doesn't tell us one way or the other, and you can give this fan theory if you want, but that's all it is. Like, the show doesn't tell us.
Yeah,
It tells
I
us
think
certain
that-
things,
I think it's very much a reach.
but it does tell us certain things. Like, it does say she figured out before she went to the city of the Looking Glass that Koto the Black Rabbit was her mother. And there was images of Koto's image looking directly at the city of the Looking Glass, and that she snuck in there to be with her mother at night. But her mother, obviously being weak, doesn't always appear, and so she went out seeking where her mother's real form resided, which she presumed was the city of the Looking Glass city.
Which is false.
Not necessarily, because Koto, the mother, is technically the god of that city and the only way in and out.
But so Koto is actually in the holy place, right? The moon.
Yes.
And according to our theory, that's also where all the shrine people are all the time, right? So in fact, Koto is
yes.
very, very close to the mother all the time. She's on the same plane.
Yeah, don't
She's
think
like in a
the
different
shrine
room or
people are
something.
necessarily there.
Yeah, that was what is it? That was a guess.
Speculation.
Speculation, yes, thank you.
But this is all speculation, but yeah.
But I mean, at the same time, even if that was true, like that satellite being were the main section of the shrine, you don't actually see the moon aside from the pictures of it floating on the wall. So the young Koto may not have known that her mother was there until later.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, she definitely did not know.
Yeah.
So the
Oh, she-
question is, if her mother, or rather the picture of her mother, is what is pointing her towards the mirror world, because she is going there in search for her mother, then why should that happen that way if that is not the place where she can find her mother, because her mother has already left the world?
Well, I think I'm gonna draw this back. This is a bit far-fetched, but if you go back to the scene where she's in the room and Koto leaps from the painting and starts running towards the other painting, the other wall,
Yeah.
and she stands
Well,
there,
no,
she
she
opens
runs
up her
towards-
arms.
He runs towards Inari, who's seated in a chair
Yeah,
between the mirror world and the painting.
but she vanishes before she gets there, and so
She vanishes as she passes through young Koto.
no, she doesn't pass through Koto. She vanishes before. the
Yeah,
hand.
she vanishes as she's passing through young Koto.
Yeah. But Koto might draw the conclusion that she was going not towards Inari necessarily, but towards Inari and the city in the Looking Glass.
Why
Which would
didn't
be
she use her
true
hammer on the painting of the rabbit then, if she's looking for her mother?
because the mother was heading towards the city of the Looking Glass.
But if she saw the mother come
think-
out of the painting and she looks at the painting of her mother and says Koto and is like, oh, that's her name, she's already made that distinction.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that her mother's in the painting, and she can assume that her mother might not be in the painting because the last she saw of her mother was running towards the city of the Looking Glass from her painting.
And then
Yeah, but
disappeared
neither
before she
is
got there.
but neither is the place where her mother is to be found, because
It's
she's
true.
in
Yeah.
the sanctuary.
But the Looking Glass, the city through the Looking Glass, is the place her mother desires to be, where her mother wants to be and go.
Yeah, but it's clearly not a place that is in any way fruitful to the journey.
But how would she know that?
Well, for one thing, because she is not there.
Which is why she goes there.
No, her mother doesn't go there. She's
No.
dragged there.
What do you mean? Like, I'm saying why Koto went there. Koto went there because she thought she could find her mother there.
Little
Yeah,
Koto.
right. The question is, why does her mother point her to there?
She doesn't. Her mother desires to go back there and does so, either going to Inari or back to the city of the Looking Glass, but never makes it. And Koto assumes she can find either her mother or clues about her mother if she goes there.
So it was all a misunderstanding.
Yeah, you could probably say that's my interpretation at least. I'm sure there are other people with other interpretations of it out there, but that's my understanding of it.
And then didn't young Koto grow up in the shrine?
Yes, she grew up
And then
With
she
the
finds
shrine.
her mother when going back to the shrine from the.
You're cutting out.
No, I didn't cut off. I just stopped because
Oh.
she finds her mother by going back to where she started looking for her mother.
No,
Not-
actually, the way then. All right, we have pondered this enough, I think. So, yeah, I don't think there are more answers to be had here.
Yeah.
So,
No, most likely not.
so it's basically a misunderstanding. Is what we are arriving at. Then
Most
the
likely, yes.
question necessarily is, in which way does Koto's arrival in the mirror world necessarily cause the destruction of that world? And that's
Which
the thing.
Koto?
What?
Which one? There's two Kotos.
Oh, the
young
one that
one.
caused the disruption. Yeah, the young one.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the young Koto, right? So I don't think there is a good explanation here, and
I
I actually don't think there needs to be a good explanation because it's taken for granted as the way the universe functions. But if you think there is one, go ahead.
Well, I think it's because they do comment that she forced her way in, and they actually show the painting after she
Yes,
forced her way in,
right.
it was cracked. So what she basically did is she cracked the fabric of that painting of that city, and so
Yes,
it
she
was
did.
unbalanced. And as she continued to destroy it, and that because her hammer was basically the same as the city, so it was kind of counteracting. So when she destroyed it, she continued to crack that fabric of reality. When she finally went through the portal, which was the giant, and brought her mother back, that shattered kind of the image on the wall. And when that image shatters, because it's connected to the other planes also start to shatter.
Yeah,
And
but all she shatters is a barrier essentially.
but that barrier is the plane itself. I mean, that image on the wall that she shattered is the entire plane.
And by breaking that, she breaks the entire universe.
Yes, because the universe, according to the writing of the show, is all interconnected.
Well, it's interconnected through the 13th plane, right? But I don't think the planes are connected in themselves to each
They
other.
are. They're all connected. Or at least that's logically the answer, since if the 13th plane is connected to all the other 12 planes, then therefore all the other 12 planes must somehow be connected.
No, I feel like they make a
even if
really
it's
big
through the
deal out of it
13th plane.
in like episode 9 or 8 when they say that the problem with the 13th plane is that it's connected to all 12 at once, which the other ones are
Yes.
not.
Well, I mean, if it's connected to all 12 at once, then to me at least that speaks that all 12 are connected together. Even if it's through the 13th plane, they're all connected.
Well, that's technically true, yes, but... Well, that's true by definition. If one thing is connected to 12 other things, then all 12 things are connected to one another.
Yeah. But that's my explanation.
But I don't feel that they are independently connected.
Probably, I couldn't tell you. I actually don't know the answer to that one.
Because they really make a big deal out of it that the 13th plane is connected to all 12 at once, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
But I suppose
I
all
hope
12 planes are connected to the moon?
That one I can assumedly say yes, because the moon is the holy place for the shrine,
Right.
which governs all the planes.
Do we learn about any of the 12 planets?
No.
What on them? Or...
We learn about one, which is Earth as we know it, or in that world.
How can we assume that?
Basically, just that's an assumption, but you can assume because it has the same format as the regular world, same buildings, or
Well,
similarly buildings, similar technology, populace, and
So-
whatnot.
So right at the beginning of the very show, wherein he says that I believe that you will be able to go there, Kodo, or go to a happy place or something. That's the Earth what they're sitting in, right? When we see some big city.
Yeah, they're in the Earth.
Yeah.
They're on Earth, most likely. Or that's my assumption, is that they're on Earth.
That seems
And also,
likely.
I would make the argument that the planes are connected, actually, because the shrine has access to all of them from one very specific location, and they have the crystal-like balls that represent all the planes in one location. So I would make the argument that, logically speaking, you can assume or speculate that they're all connected and interconnected, since they're run by the same organization and were created by the same god. Or gods. But speaking of gods, something I actually found interesting, because I googled this actually. I was curious why the god was represented as a rabbit, monkey, and a frog, which to me actually speaks two different messages, one based on the Christian religion, which is 3-in-1, so he is
Trinity,
three
yeah.
in one. Yeah, the Trinity.
There's a lot of biblical
But
stuff in there.
yeah, there is a lot of biblical stuff in there. But another thing I took out of it was I googled it and I was looking it up, and I found the very first quote unquote Japanese manga / story on paper was Kyousougiga or Kyousougiga, which depicts a rabbit, a monkey, and a frog. And if we're going to go, thematically, you could make the argument that they were the first drawings, and then by continuing to draw, they continued to progress through Japanese history on wall scrolls, which is also why they use so many scrolls themselves to convey messages throughout the story. Excuse me. Which I just found was an interesting little Easter egg type thing.
So we can talk about the Trinity thing. It feels like the Trinity is represented by 2 times. One is when God himself is divided into 3 animals, which is like three things that are all the same person. But then you also have sort of like the real Trinity, where you have God, who's like silent and stays back. Then you have and you have something like a Jesus figure, kind of, that comes home and then goes again and then comes back when Doomsday comes. Basically, he brings the end again. Yeah. And then there is the guy who heads the shrine, who can at times be seen kind of close to the Holy Spirit, which is closely connected with the church.
Yeah.
So I feel that there's this sort of allegory to the Christian Trinity.
There is. This anime is based off of a lot, and I mean a lot, of religious concepts and ideas.
Yeah.
And that was one of the more clear ones. I thought it was because I believe the Bible does have the quote that when I return, I will bring both the beginning and the end.
All right, so I actually have that quote loaded up.
Yeah, they have that.
And this actually, I can also want to explain this thing with the A and Un, which are Koto's 2 sidekicks.
Yeah.
Which he says means the
beginning and the end.
Beginning and the end. And I believe this is actually a Greek. This is actually a reference to a Greek phrase. And actually, this is from Revelations. This is the last page of the Bible. Yeah. Revelation chapter 22, verse 13. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. An Alpha and Omega means the beginning and the end. It's the first letter of the Greek alphabet and the last letter of the Greek alphabet. Similarly, A and Un can now. The Japanese have a lot of alphabets, but in one way of writing one of those syllables, A is the first letter and N is the last letter.
Yeah.
So I thought this is like the Japanese version of Alpha and Omega.
Well, there's another thing about A and Un that I'd like to bring in, which is that they're based kind of off of Kumaino or Kamainu, which are statues that guard Shinto temples. That are the 2 lion-like dog things. One with its mouth open, one with its mouth closed, that are called A and Un, which also mean the beginning and the end. And I also thought it was interesting that the line with its mouth open is A, and in the anime, A is very lax and he's more talkative and louder than his brother Un, who is more quiet and reserved. And I just thought that was an interesting little thing that they threw in there.
Yeah.
But they had, going back to Greek / Roman mythos and concepts, they had the pomegranates led Persephone to the underworld, and they trapped her in the underworld when she ate them. And I felt it was reflective somewhat of the younger Myoes.
So that's the myth of what?
What?
Myth of what?
Persephone,
Persephone?
when so in, I think it was Greek. I don't know if Persephone is Greek or Roman. But when she goes down to the Greek, when she goes down to the underworld with Hades, because Hades lures her down there, she eats pomegranates, and Hades makes the argument that since she's eaten food here, she's trapped here. Therefore, right? Because that's a rule of the underworld, and so Persephone was basically trapped in the underworld for, I think it was like 6 months of the year, because she had eaten pomegranates. And I feel like because Myoe, when he died and was revived, they fed him pomegranates. He felt trapped in his body, just like Persephone was trapped in the underworld.
So when you say Myoe, you mean the young Myoe?
Yeah, the young Myoe that killed himself and that desired death until almost the very end. Yeah. And I also thought that because pomegranates are also in Buddhism a symbol of fertility, and I thought that was interesting because the Hariti, which is a demon in Buddhist culture, turned into a bodhisattva, which is the being that lent Koto her body when she ate a pomegranate or the pomegranate seeds. And that's just another interesting fact because Koto was eating the pomegranate seeds to feed them to the young Myoe or Yakimaru.
While we are on that topic,
Yeah.
that was very interesting that the first time we actually saw them was not during the flashback scene in which Myoe got them fed, but actually in the episode before, which was episode 6, if I recall correctly, when we actually, during the scene where Myoe and Koto, the young ones each, are on the cornfield, actually see very, very brief shots of Myoe feeding Koto some of the, however they're called, things.
Pomegranate.
Pomegranates.
Yeah, right. So we actually see first him giving her some and then her giving him some, both brief shots during that sequence, and we only see them in full in the next episode when we see the flashback at which he was revived using them.
Yeah. Pomegranates are very prevalent throughout the show. I mean, if you look, there's one on the train. During that episode, there's they're just very prevalent, like the flowers throughout the show. And I thought that was a very interesting thing.
Yeah, the question is, what in particular is it supposed to mean in the sequence with Koto, the young one?
To me, it probably means because in Buddhism, pomegranates also symbolize they symbolize fertility and the protection of children against death and evil. And so it could be talking about the protection of the child from the death and the evil. But that's just speculation. I don't actually remember the scene you're talking about, so I can't really.
I'll try to get a screenshot.
All right. But another thing, just going off of Myoe and Koto, I think it's interesting how they contrast each other in so many different ways. For example, Koto wears a lot of white in certain scenes, where Myoe wears primarily darker colors. Myoe wants death and he creates life, where Koto wants life and brings death. And then just the different eras and morals and ideologies they carry with them are so contrasting. And they're, technically speaking, if you want to be real, Myoe is the oldest sibling. He was the first to be admitted into the family, and Koto was the youngest, being the last to be admitted into the family.
What family? Oh no, you're talking about young Koto. Okay.
Yeah, the young Koto.
Right. It's very bothersome that they all have the same names.
Well, I think that's very symbolic.
It is. It's the rebirth, right? And stuff.
Well, it's rebirth, and it's also going back to the culture of obligation, where a son picks up his father's name when he takes his father's career. And because Myoe was taking the role of God, and in a way, Koto the young Koto was taking her mother's name as she takes up the role of God as well.
I also think there was this thing where Koto was supposed to save Inari with her love, but then in the final scene we actually have young Koto's love reaching Inari and making him agree to his role.
Yes. Also, I can hear myself.
Yeah, I saw.
Okay. I think Koto was the one who had to change the family. Well, I do believe that the older Koto brings a lot of progressive ideas into the show. I believe it's the young Koto that brings in the most and changes the perspective of the family and saves them in a sense. And she's the one that convinces both her father and her mother to live on. And yeah, she convinces both her father and brother, to live on. They continue living not for them, not out of obligation, but for love and emotion. I will say though that I thought it was interesting how the show depicted feminism in the show, because they did depict feminism to me, especially with Koto being on equal footing with her husband Inari, which is depicted a lot by the angles of the show, as they use angles a lot to depict who's in charge of the conversation and who's leading it on. A really good example of this being with the chief priest versus in his argument with the young Koto, was he's depicted as this tall, foreboding man that looks down upon her, but suddenly, it kind of shifts as she looks down upon him, and because of the angle of it, and it goes back and forth. And I thought that was interesting, and it portrays Koto a lot as being equal with Inari, and how she lectures him, she slaps him, and how she initiates that relationship. And I also feel that here's another thing actually that Koda relies that the mother relies a lot on outside forces to push them together. For example, she relied on the Bautista to bring her together with Inari. If you look at the image while she's a rabbit, right before that, there's a pull from outside of the temple blocking the two. Similarly, though, when the young Koto first enters the Looking Glass City, she falls from the sky, and there's a temple between her and her brother Mioe, which she, using her hammer, destroys the roof and forces her way on her own with her own power into their lives, and doesn't rely on an outside force, which is why I think it should have been, thematically speaking, Koto that convinces them to continue living, and not the mother Koto.
I don't know. I feel like this is something that can be said of most like strong female protagonists. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like there are anime around on the point of throwing like a feminist point. Like, Whisper of the Heart has this point as this like comes out of nowhere at the end, wherein a girl declares she will not be a man's burden, and she will not be a burden on a man. It's like this weird feminist point that comes out of nowhere, in my opinion. But here, I didn't really get any feminism out of it.
Well, it wasn't necessarily like a. I might have misspoken, like when I said feminist. You might have
It just has a
misunderstood
strong
me. I meant
female lead.
what?
It just has
Well,
a strong
no.
female lead.
Not that. It's based on the time period that the anime starts and when it occurs, because it kind of goes back to the honor thing and the morals of that time, where women weren't supposed to be like this. They weren't supposed to be on equal footing. They weren't supposed to initiate the relationships, and they weren't supposed to lecture their husbands. It was a man over woman society, and in that sense, I believe that Koto, the mother, was a very feminist character in the sense of her time when she was alive and when this relationship started. She would have been very, very hardcore feminist.
But that's true of basically every shonen show they made today that's set in the samurai period. Like, I don't feel you can like base this off the date that the show is set in. You have to look at what year the show is made. And this year show was made in 2013.
And
like,
also,
you have
to take into account that even in Japanese history, despite the like, women have always been seen, even if it's humorously, as being kind of lords of the home domain, whereas men are publicly the one of power. But like,
which is funny
really
because
affairs of the home where they were seen as on equal footing.
yeah, which is funny because Koto, the mother, is the god of their home plane, whereas Ina is the god of all the planes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So very much that's kind of non-feminist that she's the god of the home plane and taking care of the children and those kinds of things.
I don't think there's any intent conveyed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
No, I can see that. I do think it's interesting. Going back, I don't think we've discussed Alice in Wonderland.
If you look at the scene like 3 seconds after it says Buddha Lokani, it also mentions the other one, Buddha would have
Yeah.
Vista.
But Vista, yeah.
Which is apparently a person who has reached nirvana because they have compassion for other beings.
Yeah, which is, I think we talked about this earlier, and I was talking about how because it has compassion, it doesn't necessarily desire its body back immediately. It can wait, and why it give its body in the first place.
But it also explains why it is that Koto can see the future, which is that she is in the body of this Buddha, whose eyes can see the future.
Yeah.
So it's not that she's the god; it's that she's temporarily borrowing the body of a god who has an eye that can see the future.
Yeah.
So how did you all feel about the otaku character, who's like the girl that overreacts to everything? Did you find her humorous? Did you enjoy?
I found her a below-average random character sidekick.
Yeah.
I did not think she was interesting in any sense.
Yeah, I didn't really either.
Oh, I loved the short sequence, and I think was it the third episode already, where they basically parodied old mecha openings from the 60s even, in terms of style.
You know, the remote control of justice thing?
Yeah, but in particular when before they, I think it was in episode 3,
Yeah,
they basically did a short
the Kurama
segment
episode.
where they played where they played a fictional anime opening
Right, right, right.
sequence with her and the robot she controls with
Right.
the remote controller, and they made it very 60s styled in terms of designs.
In black and white.
Yeah, they made it black and white. They even added old sound effects in to make it sound older, like the audio quality is lost. And even the
Yeah.
song fit perfectly in the time period. I thought that was a funny sequence.
I thought it was, yeah. I mean, it was. It maybe made a slight smile on my face, but nothing more than that.
Yeah, I think it was very much just comic relief.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
I think it was in that aspect very reminiscent of Fully Cooley.
Yes.
But Rika, did you have any thoughts on her?
Not really. Thought that her overreactions were a bit entertaining, but overall I was kind of confused as to what her role in the story was. Because whenever they created this Looking Glass City, I suppose he also created people to inhabit it. So she must have been created by Inari. These are the things I wondered about her and his other lackeys, and also the girl that Yoshi, I forget his name, second Mioe was infatuated with. Like all these characters, they must have been created by Inari at the beginning of this plane.
Yes, they were.
Yeah.
And for some reason, there's some characters which are expressed and look like people, but the vast majority of the residents are just kind of these
Weird shapes.
peg-looking
Yeah.
guys.
But I think
has-
in the very first sequence, when they introduced the other world, they showed that a lot of different beings live in it.
Yeah.
That was the main contrast, was the normal Kyoto. That it was inhabited not only by humans, but beings from, presumably in the context of the show, is being from all 12 planes. I think we can take it as that in that context. Because the original point was to give a Kyoto that his children can actually live in. Because if we remember back from episode 3, Kurama was very disappointed with not being able to visit the capital, given he wasn't human, so he couldn't go there.
Yeah.
Right.
Instructions by Inari, which is also why he created Mirror Kyoto, because that was able to fulfill his children's wishes of going out to the city.
Well, I think it has to do also a lot with the parallels it has with Alice in Wonderland, and specifically through the story through the Looking Glass. Because the in the same interview, Matsumoto, I think it was Matsumoto, it might have been the other person who it was, mentioned that a lot of the aspects that they were trying to do was to look like a chessboard, which in the Lewis's Carol Through the Looking Glass plays major roles in the story itself. And so I feel like, first off, like the characters, a lot of the cutouts looked like cards in a sense. And so they represented the card people. And similarly, the kind of the coloration of black and white and the shapes and the layout of the city kind of look like a chessboard. And that's, I think, what another thing they were going for with that, which is why they chose that specifically.
Like, I see that the city is called the Looking Glass City, and I see that they're going into a different world, but other than that, I don't see many parallels through the Looking Glass.
There's quite a few, actually.
I suppose there's also like a main character as a girl.
No.
And also being led there by a rabbit.
A rabbit.
Yeah, being led there by a rabbit.
All right.
The fact that the city of the Looking Glass is supposed to be the opposite of in the story Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll, the house of the Looking Glass is the exact opposite of her real house. Everything's opposite, kind of. And similarly, in this Looking Glass City, Kyoto is kind of the opposite, right? It's this diverse place of all 12 planes, not just one. People don't die; things regenerate when they're destroyed.
Yeah,
and so
but
it's kind of like, yeah.
Those are about the only differences. It's not really opposite in any other sense of how it's composed.
I also don't feel that a city where nobody dies is a opposite of a regular city.
Because in a regular city, not everybody dies.
Well, I mean, nobody dies at all in this city. They continue to live.
That's like saying an elven city from Tolkien is the opposite of a human city.
Yeah,
but
but
I
the
think
world in Through the Looking Glass was not necessarily opposite. It's just different in minute ways.
Yeah.
I think major rather than minute, but
Well, I feel like I
There's
think they
some
mentioned that
major
the
reason.
rules that
Well, the
govern
thing
it.
is that it like primarily exists to be. It's recognizable as reality. Like all the aspects of the world in Alice in the Wonderland are things that we can recognize from our own reality, like a chessboard, a cat. Like all these things exist. The only thing is that the properties that they have are slightly different. So it's like you walk into a room where everything is made for a giant.
Yeah.
That kind of.
All right.
The room still exists on the human plane, and the possibility for a room to be that big still exists on the human plane, and we can conceptualize these, but like the execution is different, and that's what makes the world in the Alice in Wonderland, why I said it has minute changes.
Yeah. I also think it's interesting that, like, going back to what Thor said about the rabbit leading Inari and the rest of, and therefore everybody else into the Looking Glass because Koto, the mother, is a rabbit and the key. I also think it's interesting that she also leads Inari to finding love for another being aside from himself, um, which is her initial kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's. I don't want to speculate too much because it's been a while since I last engaged with all Alice in Wonderland, so I'm not too
Yeah.
sure about the work itself anymore. But I think there's a similarity in kind of subverting the established structures in the place to which the girl is transported.
Yeah.
So I think there's but I don't think it necessarily thematically lines up perfectly.
I don't really see it honestly, but
I guess it's just an allusion to a previous work.
yeah, I can see maybe like a reference, but not much more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's skin deep. But
Yeah,
it's a girl being led by a rabbit into an alternate world where she goes and fucks shit up.
Well, I think that there are definitely parallels that I feel they seek to show throughout the show. Because there are just a number of parallels to me, at least, between the show and whatnot. And a lot of I mean, for example, they actually have the book of Through the Looking Glass recur throughout the series.
Yeah.
There are scenes where, like, when he's sleeping on the hill and the book falls off his face, it zooms into the title of the book, and it is Lewis's Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, and that
Oh,
book
yeah.
recurs several times, which is why I believed it was representative of the certain aspects of the show, like the rabbit leading him to the city of the Looking Glass, the name of the city, the small, minute changes in the city, the chessboard, along with the quote from, it was actually the chief of the art, I believe, the animator, Hayashi, who said that they wanted it to be like a chessboard, and they threw in aspects of chess, such as the chief priest playing chess, because they're all related to Alice in Wonderland.
It
As
feels
well
to,
I think it looked very much like a chessboard in all honesty.
it feels to me that
Yeah.
whenever a show has some sort of very direct reference to another piece of literature, like showing the book, that everyone then goes and really tries to analyze what references there are of this book. But actually, I really often feel it's very skin deep. There's another example where in a show called Septon or Tempest, wherein a few of Shakespeare's plays are mentioned a lot, and everyone tries to analyze the show in the context of Shakespeare, whereas actually that's not a relevant context at all, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, see, I kind of throw this in there because the show makes the references, and these references, to me at least, are somewhat deeper than most shows. I mean, they have a random chessboard. They have shots of it at random points of time that the chief priest of the shrine plays, with no real explanation other than the possibility of it connecting to Alice in Wonderland, which the book Through the Looking Glass relies heavily on chess as a what's the word, as a symbol of like growth and changing who you are, which kind of relates to the show itself as it's a Bildungsroman.
But does it
Or
thematically connect?
in a way, it does, I believe.
I also feel that chess is very often used in anime and other shows as a show of like, this character is smart because this character plays chess.
But it doesn't. It never says that the chief priest, or it never really infers that he's smart. In fact, it kind of infers the opposite.
Wait, so
when a
who's the
young
chief priest
girl-
again? Oh, yeah, you're talking about the brother of Inari.
Yeah.
Okay,
Inari's
that
brother,
guy, okay.
Because he's beaten in an argument by Koto. He kind of steps back when Koto gives him her point of view and says, "You know what? You might be right." And that's when he then turns the tables and betrays both of them as they're in shock.
So in Alice in Looking Glass, in Alice in Wonderland, the chess character is a queen, right? And she's an antagonist, right?
Yes.
So you
Yes,
could say it's a sign that the chief priest is an antagonist of some sort.
in a way, yes, you could say that. I forget the exact line, but it was in Through the Looking Glass that basically says, you start out as a pawn, but as you go up, you can grow up and become something more. And I feel that's kind of similar to Koto, the young Koto, as she starts out as a crybaby with no real power, and she becomes basically the heir, the possible heir to being a god. And she's gone up and she's become, and because they use the reference in Alice in Wonderland of becoming a pawn, getting across the board, or getting across the city of Kyoto, of the Looking Glass city, and becoming a king, and that king would be God in this sense.
But she doesn't.
She declines the offer, yes. Just as in chess, you can say, I don't want that pawn to become a king, I want to become something else, or if anything.
Yeah, but I mean, she rejects becoming God.
Mm-hmm. She
Eventually.
does.
Yeah. She convinces
Because
her dad to do it instead.
What?
She convinces her dad to become God, or to remain God.
Yes. Yes. She convinces her dad to continue living.
Like, it seems like crying is like a theme of the show, wherein you see Yakushimaru cry a lot, you have Kodo cry a lot, little Kodo cry a lot, and then there's also this argument in episode 9 or 10 wherein they talk about whether or not the dad cries, wherein the dad is saying he doesn't cry and Kodo says he does cry. Like, I don't really know if there is anything interesting to talk about there, but it is like a theme of some sort.
I think it kind of goes back to how they used black to show people hiding their emotions, because that seems to be a theme of the show based on the interview I read, what they said about that in colors, specifically black, and how every character has a bit of black on them for the most part, aside from those at the shrine who don't really seem to lie. They seem to be very, they follow what they believe. And that's why, I believe it kind of has to do with it, because crying is a sign of hiding your emotions and suppressing them and finally then releasing them as you cry. And that's just how I interpreted it.
I think quite the opposite. The crying is showing your emotions, whereas the characters that don't cry, such as Kurama and the others, are the ones that are dishonest in some sense. It's just interesting to me that Little Kodo and Yakushimaru are the two that are always called crybabies in the show.
Yeah, but I feel that when they cry, they're releasing suppressed emotions. I remember when Kodo, as a 15-year-old, we first see her cry when she's in the girlfriend's apartment, and she just starts sobbing. And that's just her, because she had all these repressed emotions that she's just releasing. And that's how I interpreted it, that crying is a release of suppressed emotions. So I wouldn't disagree with you what you said, but
That's
in a
not
way,
interpretation. That's just literally how crying works.
yeah, I know.
Okay,
I
so
mean, I
one
don't think there's much to say about the crying other than that is literally a representation of their emotions. It's a very natural thing. It's like completely logical.
Yeah.
So one sorry, you go ahead.
So yeah, for one thing, we talked about this earlier. So I posted the screenshot from episode 5, actually, not 6.
Oh,
I
yeah, yeah.
remember it. So, with respect to the fruit, what would you say about this?
Well, I would say first off that it's kind of like binding them together. If you watch, it's kind of like binding them together by blood, because Koto, the daughter Koto, is Inori and the mother Koto's flesh and blood, and Mioe, the younger Mioe, is in a way the flesh and blood of Inori and Koto, as Inori used his own blood to draw the pomegranate, and Inori fed it to him using her own saliva. And so it connects them in a sense that he has the pomegranate because he was the one who was saved with it, and she is similar in that sense, and it connects them, though I can't say exactly why, other than possibly his desire to protect her, or her desire to protect him.
And she's made of their flesh and blood.
Yes.
Yes.
It's interesting that the pomegranate gave Yakushimaru immortality. But I don't know if there's anything to say about that. I mean, maybe that's just like the magic of the god.
Well, I mean, he's the god of creation and life, so in a way
Right.
he could have done that. And I think that he was hatching his plan to stop being the god and vanish way back then when he did that. Um, though that would be
Yeah,
kind of,
definitely.
yeah.
I think that's fair.
And so that's why he did that. And he had planned on um, he had planned on the younger Myoe taking over, which is also probably why Myoe came from a shrine that was on fire when he killed himself. He had done something that was honorable, hence the seppuku or whatever. And he was from a shrine, so he had that knowledge of being a priest and whatnot, which is why he would probably be a desirable heir to, whatnot, because he was also a child, so he could be raised to know about this.
All right, then I would like to go back and question now the really interesting parts of the plot, and
Okay.
and see if you can tell me whether it makes sense or not. So the first and most obvious question, which Gru tried to address earlier, but I'm cut him off intentionally. How exactly did Koto manage to recover the older Koto, her mother, from the inside of a random robot?
So we're talking episode 6.
Episode 6, right.
And I
Yeah,
don't
there
think
is
from
that.
the inside of that robot.
It's it's not from the inside of the robot. The robot itself is a portal.
Yeah,
If you remember
that's
the
what
character,
I mean.
yeah, if you remember the character Fushimi, he's the one who built the robot. And Kuramaru makes a comment about how the technology Fushimi brought with him, because Fushimi works for the shrine, so he would logically have access to the knowledge of how to create a portal to the shrine's holy place. And Kuramaru kind of proves this by stating to Fushimi that he's thanking him for the technology that he's brought with him and the ideas that he's brought with him, and how this allowed them to do certain things. He doesn't say specifically go to the holy place, but this, in the context of the story, is right around that same time when she goes to the holy place, and it's a quick flashback to creating the robot itself. Um, so what probably happened was Fushimi came in. How he came in though, I don't know. I couldn't answer if you asked me that. But he came in and he created them this. He helped them create this portal to the holy place, which they didn't previously have access to, and that whole portal was in the form of the robot.
So you're telling me that the shrine had another inconceivable way of getting someone into the mirror world, which was thought to be impossible except with the power of Inari himself.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. I can't tell you.
And they got Fushimi in just to build a robot as a contrived way of a means of a portal to bring the older Koto with help of the younger Koto into the mirror world. So I would like to know, what does the shrine gain from doing this? And furthermore,
I mean, first of all, the shrine
the
isn't
shrine-
supposed to know that this exists.
the shrine doesn't know it exists. How
So
Fushimi found out about it is but unbeknownst to me. But it does say that he is a defector of the shrine. in a
Right, so the
sense.
idea is that Fushimi found it somehow
Somehow.
and hasn't told the shrine about it.
and somehow got into it nonetheless.
Yeah, and
And,
that
and
I
then
don't
built
know
a
how.
portal to it in the form of a robot. So did Fushimi actively conspire with Kurama? Because, well, was Kurama knowing about the robot that Fushimi built and what the robot
Well,
is
yeah,
Well, I thought Kurama
Right.
wanted to leave the Looking Glass
Right,
City
right.
Hall.
wanted to leave.
But I don't think there's a portal involved personally. The way I interpret it is, but just before the whole thing battle happens, Kurama says this thing that magnets attract except if they're the same pole, and then they push one another away. And I think the idea is that that Kodo's hammer and this robot has the same technology, so they would push one another away, and Kodo hits the thing so hard that the magnetic push away thing just launches her out into outer space, and this somehow creates a hole in whatever.
No, I think that what they were referring to with that is why things don't rebuild themselves, because she's destroying the magic
Yeah.
they had. With the robot, what I assume the robot is because it eats Kodo, basically. That's basically what it does, right? And when it eats
Yes.
her, it pushes her through the portal into the holy place, which I don't think is that far-fetched, because Fushimi's a scientist for the shrine, and the scientists of the shrine manage in their main hub the portals that go to each of the different planes. So all he did is he reconstructed a portal that they've already built before, and he did it in a different form, and that allowed them to go to the holy place.
I'm getting a screenshot.
Okay. Now, how he got to the city through the Looking Glass, I wouldn't know.
Yeah, that seems like a plot hole to me.
Uh-huh.
All right. Then the next question is so he he constructed this robot. He informed Kurama about this, and then in turn they arranged the experiment, the so-called experiment, right?
Yeah.
So Kurama obviously is in because he wants to get out, so a portal would be helpful, but also because he wants to reunite with his mother. So that is obvious. But what does Fushimi have to gain from this? Why is he partaking? Or rather, if we interpret him as a representative of the shrine, what does the shrine gain from this?
Well, first off, I wouldn't consider him a representative of the shrine, as it is said that he is not like he's a defector of the shrine. Um, Now, why he decided to build it is another thing. They don't really dive into Fushimi's character really at all, and they just leave you pondering why he did what he did. So I don't think anybody could really tell you that unless they go really deep and speculate it, which I don't think I have the knowledge to do.
All right.
But that's even if it's a plot hole, that's their way of explaining how they created that robot and how they got to that location.
Yeah, I would very much consider it a plot line. I'm addressing this because it goes back to the point I was addressing earlier in my initial thought statement, that I feel that this sacrifices narrative cohesion for the sake of thematic cohesion. Because
Yeah.
it makes it very much thematically makes sense to bring Koto back, the old one.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really fit narratively because it doesn't make sense that they have a means of bringing her back.
Yeah, which I think a lot of shows do something similar in terms of throwing logic out the window in certain senses and going through a narrative completion, um, which I'm fine with in most cases. They at least didn't pull this entirely out of their ass, as they said, this is why we were able to build it, though why we had the person who was able to build it is still never really explained.
Speaking of the Fushimi thing, when little Kodo first time she comes to the Looking Glass City, Myoe says that this is the first time that a civilian has made it to in centuries or something like that.
Yeah, Myoe didn't know about Fushimi.
It's
Only
very
Kurama
interesting
did.
though, because we got hinted at this basically early on, because Fushimi said he wasn't there yet in the capital when Koto, the old one, was there for the last time, because when
Yes.
she rewrites, he doesn't recognize her. So
Yeah.
it's really questionable why no one bats an eyes when he says this. This wouldn't because that he states this openly. That he says, well, no, actually, it doesn't state this if I recall correctly. He gets asked, "Weren't you were not here already when she was here the last time?" So that means that everyone else is in on the fact that he arrived
Not-
at some point midway through, right?
Not everyone. I think it's only Kurama's group that knows about this.
I don't.
Well, at least Shoko. At the very least, because she asked the question, if my memory suffices.
Yeah,
But
no,
at least,
she knows.
some people do. So the question is still why he got in, and also why did some people know about this?
Well, I would assume because he works with them, they would know about it. Like Shoko, I know Kurama knows, and I'm assuming that most of Kurama's faction, or at least the higher ups in it, know about his existence and that he wasn't there at the beginning. Though who else knows and how he got there is, I don't know. But I do know that Myoe, the younger one, doesn't know about him not have been being there from the start.
So one problem I had with the show that I'd like to cover before we close the VC is, it seems to me that at first they tried to say that that it wasn't really great being in Looking Glass City, and Kurama especially wanted to get out. But by the end, they kind of tried enforcing this idea there was a paradise, and it felt like contradictory to me.
I think it was a change of their views. Kurama wanted to get out because he wanted to find his family. They wanted to find their mother. That's why they wanted to leave. Kurama wanted to leave to find his mother. Yase wanted to leave to find his mother, and Myoe didn't necessarily want to leave. He wanted to give the beads back to his father so he could die. Similarly, Kurama was likes building things like his father. He likes creation, and he wanted to find his father. He said to ask him questions, and Yase obviously feels very connected to her mother, so she wanted to leave to find her mother, and that's why they were trying to leave. Their goal was to find their mother, and once their mother came back to the city, it became to them at least paradise
I
because they
don't.
were
Yeah,
reunited.
It felt like they were
yeah.
bored to me.
Yase was the happy one, and they felt that if they brought their mother back, their father would also soon return, which he did. So
Yeah, I think it was less about the paradise itself, but about the
yeah,
fact that in the
yeah,
end they got reunited with their family, because this is one of the main thematic lines that linearly progresses throughout the show, that they they live for them, that they awaken to living for themselves, to live for themselves for one thing, but
yeah,
also but also the importance of stressing the importance of family.
yes,
I think
and
these are two of the main thematic lines.
yeah. Going off of the second part about family, it was living for yourself based on your emotions and love for your family. I related this entire a lot to the concepts brought within the anime Shigofumi, which it goes a little deeper into this, but it's basically that death affects others maybe more so than it affects you, and I feel that it does the same thing. Kyousougiga does the same thing where it says that your death would affect your family more so than it would affect you. So you shouldn't continue to live out of obligation and honor, but instead live based on your relationship with your family, love for them, and your connection to them and other people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Um, which is what basically the contrast between Myoe and Koto, the young Koto, was, both of the young ones. Because Koto was living for her love for her father and the desire to meet and love her mother, and Myoe was living out of the obligation to give his father the beads back and out of serving the family. And then Koto convinces him that her modern morals are more right, I guess, than his old ones. Um, and that's why he decides to continue living instead of desiring death as he had done previously for so long.
But I actually think in a way that desiring death is not necessarily a thing he does out of obligation.
Well, no, no, it's not desiring death is out of obligation. It's the fact that he's not going to die until he can return the beads to his father and return his father to his rightful position in his job.
So
If
without the you're saying without the obligation, he would actually just have gone and died.
he would have probably tried to, or he
Yeah, that
wouldn't have
makes
told,
sense.
because then he wouldn't have. If he wanted to die without having any form of obligation towards his father, he would have told Koto to kill him right then and there, and had a conversation like that with her there, instead of saying, "Wait till father returns. Let me return the beads to him, and then you can kill me."
Yeah, right. That makes sense. So to go back on the earlier tangent about sacrificing narrative cohesion for the sake of thematic cohesion,
Yeah.
I I think I found it especially bothersome in the later episodes, 8 and
How so?
9 respectively, um, because it feels very weird. Because since the beginning of the show, they have set up this, at least in the visions and the impending destructions, right?
Yeah.
So at one point this happens, and this happens because of Koto for whatever reason, whether we feel that is particularly justified or not. Um, so then the apocalypse happens for some reason, and we are presented with this in a very factual manner, but it has
Yeah.
been foreshadowed, and then I feel like it kind of undercuts itself, because it says for this and that reason that is not necessary, that doesn't necessarily make a logical sense in a way, but there was at least foreshadowed since early on, regardless of the fact of whether that foreshadowing was circular in nature or not. For this reasoning, we are now faced with an immediate danger, and then in the next episode, they go and and out of nowhere reveal that actually Inari is, or rather was, well, no, technically still is God, and that Mio actually has inherited his power.
Yeah.
And then all it takes is once he makes up his mind, is all it takes a very simple finger snip, and suddenly all the huge impending apocalypse that was built up, at least through foreshadowing for the entirety of the show, has been subverted, and now everything is fine again.
Yes.
I think it's very anticlimactically and contrived in a sense.
I I don't think so. For me, what that kind of showed was a growth in the character, and all of this was Inari's plan from the get-go. He knew that his children would save the world, and if he had had those beats, he most likely could have done the same thing. Because the power he has is the power of creation, and so he uses this power combined with the power from Koto to rebuild the 13th plane. And by rebuilding the 13th plane, because they're connected, he rebuilds all of the other planes as well. Um, and it is said that Inari had planned this from the get-go. Inari had known that Mioe will or has the possibility, has the capabilities with the parabeads I gave him to save the world and to restore the balance that we once had, which is what the show kind of goes through, is about balance.
If this all then went according to his plan, why did he not simply just prevent Koto from entering in the first place?
What do you mean?
In the end, all 13 planes are intact, right?
Yes.
So there was never really any problem if Inari could have just repaired all the planes.
Well, I think the problem more so with the shrine that they had with it is that this was created and it ruins their honor and their respect, which is why they have that argument between Koto and the chief priest of the shrine, where she says, "Why isn't it okay for us to just exist? We're already here. What does it matter?" And he was talking about how
about balance.
yeah, and he was talking about, well, it's not just about that; it's about balance and how you're making everything unbalanced and how you can't do this. It's not right. It's it breaks our honor, and that was
So
their
how was their
argument.
honor by the end? How was their honor changed?
What? How was honor changed?
I don't think
By
it
the end.
was, and I don't really think honor is a concept they bring up again at that point. It's
Well,
very clearly about that place, and it is about order and balance. It is not necessarily about honor.
well, it's about the order and the balance, and the people that are honored and respected and obligated to keep that place balanced is the shrine, which is why it was their duty to destroy the 13th planet.
Yeah, it is about duty, but not necessarily about honor, I feel.
To me, honor and duty go hand in hand in this series, and that's just me. That's just a
Alright.
personal.
To me,
Alright,
honor
that's
is a throwaway excuse for a plot excuse and nothing else. I mean,
So then the issue becomes, I feel that the series itself undermines the point that Koto is trying to make, because she says we exist, and why isn't that fine? But at the moment we are dealing with the very real issue that literally the entire world is about to collapse. So that is very obviously an issue that she can't simply argue away, because their existence in this plane in that particular manner, specifically her intrusion, is what is causing nearly the entire world to collapse. So obviously there is an issue. Obviously the head priest does have a point in addressing the balance.
Yeah.
And I feel that the other side to this is it loses a lot of all this conflict in the first place loses a lot of weight when the reveal is that all it takes for the problems to be fixed is Mio making up his mind and snipping his fingers with his omnipotent god powers, and suddenly everything is returned back to normal. It seems like a very cop-out way to just conjure that power up out of basically nowhere and just say we can fix it thusly.
Well,
It
he
feels,
did
it feels
conjure
like
that.
well, no, the series. Well, he always had the power, but the series
Yeah.
conjured it up out of nowhere, out of the perspective of the viewer, because we just got introduced to it at that very particular moment.
Well, while I can agree it was in a way anticlimactic, I
Yeah,
thought that it was.
I think it's a cop out essentially, and that it undermines the weight of the entire conflict throughout the show.
I agree.
I wouldn't say that, like, that is the literal conflict throughout the show. to me, the real conflict is the fact that this family is separated and that their ideologies differ so vastly.
Yeah,
So
well,
by him,
that's the thematic angle,
yeah,
right?
and
But
I felt the
but
Yeah,
this
show
but
was
was
but narratively, that conflict shouldn't even exist if the god of creation has the power to fix everything. Like their
the God of
whole fact
creation
that they were
didn't.
separated at the beginning should have never happened.
Well, no, because
Other than it's an honor cop out idea.
well, not just that, but it goes somewhat narratively, maybe not as concrete as you would have liked it to, but because Inari, who is the god of creation, doesn't want to exist anymore. He wants his son to take over, and the only way his son is going to take over is if he realizes that he needs to use this power for good, or he needs to use it in general. And so he determines, basically, to because he plans this. He plans to quote unquote destroy the world and force the other Myoe to basically save it in an attempt to get him to inherit his power, his full power. And so by destroying the world, he's forcing this power onto Myoe. And Myoe, when he finally understands this and he gets that this is what his father wants and that this isn't the right way to go because Myoe also wants death. And he decides, you know what, I might not want to die and I don't want others to die as well. And so he saves the world. And while it may be a bit of a narrative cop out, I felt that the show itself was aiming for more of a thematic message, which I believe that this scene and this concept delivered upon.
Yeah, I agree, but that goes back to what I'm saying, is that the series undermines its narrator for the sake of its themes.
Yes.
It feels kind of
I
like
agree.
like shoujo anime. Shoujo anime and shoujo manga very often have like the conflict only exists in order for people to discuss their feelings, and once the people have gone through discussing their feelings, then the conflict just disappears randomly. But there are problems in the narrative only there so the people can discuss their feelings.
Yeah,
kinda-
Well,
I felt like that too. Whereas the entire kind of narrative problems only exist because gods are in their feelings. Like if
Yeah.
the characters didn't have these personal problems, then the world wouldn't have any sort of personal problems. And as soon as the characters sort through their personal problems, similarly, the effects of the world just reflects the feelings of the characters.
yeah, I can see that.
But that
So
also makes
now-
like the fundamental conflict of the show is Myoe has to figure out his feelings, and that's not very catching.
And it doesn't seem that it's presented in a manner that highlights Myoe's feelings. I mean, yes, the entire time is spent on developing these characters' feelings, but at the same time, I feel like the major appeal of the show is the animation, is the idea of these separate worlds, and the most pressing issues deal with the apocalypse and with gods. But all of these are kind of just aesthetic
Well-
choices when the meat of the show is based on the characters' relationships with themselves and with each other.
Yeah. And I mean, while you might look at it as being maybe bad and negative, I thought, and I thought of it as being spectacular because I felt that the way things paralleled each other, not narratively, but more emotionally, was what the show was about. I didn't take the narrative, the more literal aspects, as much as I took in the emotional aspects. And I feel that's what the score itself was for. They played it at moments to evoke emotions out of you, not based on what was going on physically, like with the destruction of the world, but more emotionally with how the characters are reacting to things. And while certain aspects of that, like the destruction of the world, the apocalypse, paralleling the desire of both Myoes for their demise, and then eventually, they change it and they save it because they want to survive. I feel like if you take into consideration like narrative aspects too much, because narrative aspects aren't necessarily always the core aspect of the show. A lot of shows, and especially anime, use these narrative aspects to bounce over and give an emotional story with the characters. So I don't think it necessarily matters what happens narratively. Like it matters, but it doesn't matter as much as what happens thematically.
Well, I think it very much matters because it exists as the foundational layer of the show. It's essentially conflict is essentially multi-layered, is what you're saying. The narrative exists in a literal sense, and it also serves as representation for an ideological conflict and the like. And that's very much a valid concept that often exists, but I kind of need the narrative to make sense and to be inherently consistent, to base something else on it. Because if the narrative falls together in itself, then also the conflict that is based upon it falls together.
Right. There should be a clear parallel. And another thing is the point of view of the show, I feel like, is it's this third person limited where it kind of shows you what it wants to show you with all these different characters, because a lot of it is done through Yakushimaru's perspective, right? There's a lot of flashbacks from him, but there's also a bunch of flashbacks from Koto, and it kind of shows you this limited guise of what they want you to see. When if the primary conflict is of Inari and himself, the god of creation, wanting to die, and therefore creation in its stead will die as well, shouldn't they have spent more time from the point of view of the central conflict? Like we're not really given what Inari sees except through the eyes of his two children, which are primarily Koto and Yakushimaru, and the other two children as well, but to a lesser extent because these two children are much more important.
I don't think.
Yeah. The question is, what even spawns Inari's beliefs, so to say? What makes him want to leave? What makes him want Mioe to take over, or rather Yakushimaru to take over as Mioe?
Okay, so I'm going to start with Rika's comment. I don't believe the main concept that they wanted to describe was about excuse me, was about like Inari's desire to die. I think it was about the conflicting emotions of Koto and Mioe and how they came to see eye to eye, which is why the show uses angles and perspectives to show who's in control of a situation by raising their height and their vision. So it looks like they're looking down upon someone. They wanted them to see eye to eye, which they managed to do. Now going off of what you said, wait, what was your question again, for?
Why exactly does Inari even want Yakushimaru to take over?
Because
Inari,
he wants to die.
No, it's not just that, but he wants to die. He feels, for starters, that he's dishonored his family. He has no obligation to it anymore, and he wants to be a normal human. And normal humans die, and that's why he created a family. He wanted to try to be a normal human being. He wanted to try to be human, and humans have an end of their life, and that's what he wants.
Yeah. But he doesn't want to forsake all creation by killing himself, so he wants to pass it on to a person who he thinks would be similarly suited to follow his goals. But the problem is he picks someone who's too similar to him, because someone who's already killed himself, someone who's been raised in this environment is, likely to repeat his same mistakes. Really, if he was going to find a better replacement, he should have done something like L's replacement in Death Note and found a more perfect version of himself that is not subject to the same fatal flaws that he had.
Yeah. But I feel like that this show was a Bildungsroman for Mioe and Koto, the younger Koto, in the sense that he had to learn to be that better self. He had to learn to save the world and want to live. And that Koto, which is kind of his opposite, is the one that pushes him to face this reality and forces him to desire to live and survive.
Yeah.
Which is why I felt that it focused more on their point of view than it did the point of view of Inari, who is simply a character that thrusts the plot into motion, but doesn't actually really affect it, other than he started the chain of events.
Yeah, and he's also the solution. It's the beginning and the end, LMAO.
And so he, the show kind of starts out from his perspective, in a sense, because it starts with most of the beginning is flashbacks to him and how the rabbit and him fell in love. I think it's like the first 10 minutes of the show has that really good sequence of words where it's going through them as they build up the relationship over time without really any words being spoken. And the ending is them together
really
as
good.
well.
It's a funny way to say a montage.
Yeah, I know. The word slipped out of my mind, okay? But so you had that montage at the beginning, and then you have not a montage, but a discussion between the two of them at the very end, because Inari is the beginning and the end.
Yeah.
But then the middle isn't really filled with him. It's filled with the people that he wants to take over for him.
Yeah. So uh,
Should we
What?
just
no,
wrap it up?
I'm trying to think of something right now. So you're saying also that to go back a bit again, that in his in Inori's attack against both the head priest and Koto, where he disables them with a sword, right?
Yeah.
What was that? Where he disables them was a what? Was it? Yeah.
With
What
a
about it?
sword, like he
Yeah. What about it? Yeah.
explains everything to her, and then he turns around and stabs her, and then stabs head
Yeah.
priest and takes control of them.
What was the
then he-
stabbing thing?
Then he makes her destroy the 13th parallel, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're saying that this also was part of his plan, just to get
Yes.
Miyoi to act?
Yes. Because he had to give Miyue basically a ultimatum: either don't do anything and the world gets destroyed, or do something and save the world.
So stabbing people was a way of getting Miyue to do stuff.
Yeah,
In a way,
in a
yeah.
sense, he became Sasuke. He became the villain because he wanted to spur the hero into action, right?
Well, he's portrayed in a rather villainous light throughout almost the entire series.
Or I guess Itachi, my bad.
But up until like the very last couple of episodes, Inari was portrayed as a villain-like character. He had ominous music, he had these ominous looks on his face. He did things that were morally questionable, such as resurrecting someone and forcing them to live when they didn't want to, and plotting the end of the world. And
I
then
mean, he is very narcissistic in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
mean,
resurrecting someone that committed suicide does seem
I know.
yeah,
right?
Interesting.
it does seem kind of.
It
and
is.
making him immortal.
Yeah.
It is very much a narcissistic thing to do, and that's not just a question of framing; it's just a question of his deeds.
Yeah.
The person Yakushimaru wanted to commit suicide, and he revives him, he makes him immortal, and only for the sake of pretending to be human himself by adopting him as a son and acting like a family.
Yep.
He literally did the power play of, fuck you, you can't die, I'm God.
Yep. Pretty much.
I control your destiny, you don't control your own destiny.
You don't get to quit,
Yeah.
You can't fire me, I quit.
except
Yeah.
when you can't quit.
Gotta give 2 weeks notice.
I mean, and he wonders why Yakushimaru doesn't do anything. It's like, he already wanted to die. Revived him and forced him to be immortal and trying to make him into god. Why couldn't you
also-
just been more...
Not
why
just
couldn't
any
you have
god.
just explained what you wanted to happen instead of trying to be all cryptic and...
Because that's what makes the story interesting. I think that being cryptic is kind of what it
It's
does.
like
I mean,
instead,
it
he
has.
wanted Yakushimaru to assume the mantle of God on his own and didn't tell him how to or why.
No.
He just
Like,
wanted
he
him to
figured
come
that
with
out
the
by
idea
himself.
himself.
There were
Yeah.
there, there are a
Didn't
lot of
work.
stories that wouldn't work if the characters were just a little bit better to communicate, and this is one of them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of the theme, though. I mean, that's why they have black and white, because black represents the repressed emotions people have. And the story is about repressing the emotions and the feelings and what you believe.
Yeah.
But I
And
mean,
so-
Inari isn't repressing his emotions, right? He wants to die. He just isn't saying it to anyone, but
But-
he's very clearly working
Exactly.
towards it.
Exactly.
I mean, he's repressing
Not-
it in the sense
yeah.
that he's not doing it for the sake of his duty and his obligation.
Well, he's repressing it in the sense that he's hiding it from everybody else. He's not saying to other people, I want to die, so here's how I'm going to do it. Instead,
Yeah.
he tries to build it up on his own. That's why his wife, or his lover Kodo, tells him, why didn't you tell these people this? Why didn't you tell them that? Why didn't you tell them your plans for all of these things? Because he repressed it from them. He hid it from them. And he did it
Yeah.
on his own.
Yeah, I feel like that's the most interesting part of the story, but I feel like it wasn't the forefront because of just the way they told it. You know, they didn't really focus on him as a character, minus the first 2 episodes and the last 2 episodes.
Because that wasn't the goal of the show to me. They wanted to focus on Koto and the Miyoi, the young Miyoi, as they took
Yakushimaru.
up, Yakushimaru, as they took their father's place in the world, or found their own, or finding their own place, and building up the morals that they would live by, and that they would then use to push him to live by them too.
Yeah.
And also, if he wanted Yakushimaru to become the god of creation, how come he locked him inside of Looking Glass City?
Well,
But I
the
suppose he was allowed to leave, right?
No, he wasn't.
No, but what's his name? In the beginning, Kurama said
Yeah.
that he was able to visit the city, but he's only able to do that because of his father's power. But he inherited his father's power, so that can be implied that he could leave at any time, just chose not to. But whenever Koto showed up and she wanted to leave, he had the means of taking Koto outside, but he just chose not to.
I don't think he did.
Yeah, no,
think
I
he
don't
could
think
do that.
Yakshiro can leave the city.
He can't leave the city.
But didn't he have all the powers of his father?
Well, he has this creation power, yeah, but
Yeah, that's it. He only has the creation power.
Oh, so in that case, if he wasn't able to leave the 13th dimension or whatever,
Plane.
there's no way he could have assumed his father's duties.
Well-
that means on the other hand that the power to go into the 13th dimension should have still resided within Inari, so he should have been able to visit at any point in time.
Yeah.
No, it was. I think it was only Koto could go.
Well,
between
if
the two
Koto
worlds.
had the power to go in between the two worlds because she had his heart in the hammer, doesn't that mean that he should have had the power?
No, the mother.
Assuming he had his own heart.
The
Oh.
mother was because she
So
was
he
the
had the mother's
goddess
heart.
of the world. And no, Koto, the young Koto, forced her way in, and by doing that, she opened the door.
Using
which
the
is
hammer.
how- Yeah, using the hammer, which is how other characters such as the Shrine Priest and Inari were able to get into the city.
There's no way Inari could not have entered the city on his own accord.
Well, he knew how to get to Koto, the mother, to get into the city, but I don't believe he could enter it without the mother.
I'd rather
Yeah,
think
he-
the idea was he
He
what
could only enter it once Koto opened it later on.
Yeah.
The rift, that is.
I thought
Yeah.
I thought he just chose not to enter the city because then the shrine would find out about it.
He chose not to go get Koto to enter the city because the Shrine would find out about it.
But she did so either way.
And I feel that he was planning because he decided to have the young Koto as a child, and that when she entered, that was all according to his plan, because at that point the young Mioe could not leave, and so his plan was kind of to destroy the 13th parallel on the plane, and along with the other planes, and force the young Mioe to make that decision to save it, and therefore then release him to the rest of the world.
Right?
On that note, there's something I find not necessarily interesting, but confusing because throughout the show we see two romantic interest characters for Yakushimaru,
Yes.
but in the end, neither of them really matters, which I find very confusing because we see them at multiple points in time during the earlier parts of the show, but to the end they are completely discarded and don't matter anymore. It feels like a very confusing choice to first include them but then not do anything with them.
I think the idea is they wanted to build him up as like a womanizer for some reason.
I mean, the first episode very much felt like it was implying that, but that's not really a tangent that was ever developed upon later on again.
No,
Maybe they just kind of wanted to assign the characters quirks to make them interesting, like anime does.
I feel their purpose, like I haven't really thought about them that much, but I feel their purpose was more to show his human side and to also convey the message that he basically didn't talk to anybody and let out his emotions to anybody, even people he trusted and loved the most. He would suppress himself around them. But I felt that they were primarily there to show his human side and to offer different perspectives to the young Koto about Mioe's personality and how he would react to loss because he knew he had lost them, and that type of thing.
And also, what was the role of her two sidekicks? Followed her around.
On were the beginning and the end.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, like,
I think that was their main role in order to leave this clue that Kodo, when Inari says that he will return with the beginning and the end. I think that was their main role.
she named them.
Yeah. But I mean, we're not talking story here. We're talking that this is the clue that
Yeah.
Yakushimaru gets that Kodo
Yeah.
will somehow bring about Inari and the mother's return.
Well, it's actually at that point when she mentions that they are on when he refers to her as our mother, as he makes the connection that they're siblings for the first time at that moment.
Even though the viewer knew that they were siblings.
They didn't know.
I must admit, though, that for a show that, as we concluded, mainly focuses on characters coming true to their emotions, or rather how to deal with their emotions, I think that most of the character cast is detrimentally uncompelling in a way.
Because most of them aren't humans. Most of them have artificial emotions. The only real quotes around that characters that are really human um, are the two Myoes and the two Kotos, or at least main
Well,
character wise.
One of the
Because
Mewes isn't
Well,
human.
no.
Lady Koto isn't really either.
Right. So only a young
Neither,
Mew
and
and young
Inari
Kyoto.
is the furthest thing from a human. He's a god, and then the young
Except he's
Koto
trying
is
to be-
also not human at all.
well, no, because the young Myo, the older Inari is trying to be human. That's why this whole story unfolds. That's why he loses the respect and the honor. That's why he goes to
Yeah.
live in that city. That's why he has the
Yeah.
family. He's trying to be human.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's
but
all.
he
That's all
acts like, in
conjecture.
his actions is distinctively non-human.
I mean,
Exactly, but-
if you're speaking literally, then the only human really is Yakushimaru. If you're
But
speaking
even then,
completely
he's
literally-
immortal. so
Kodo
he's
too, right? Well,
not
Kodo-
human anymore.
No,
Koto's the mix between heaven and earth. Gods.
Kodo was born from a god of creation and a drawing
Buddha.
painted from that god of creation that inhabited the body of a bodhisattva. I don't
Yeah.
think that's very human.
No,
You make a good argument.
they're the ones who convey the emotions of
Yeah,
humans.
but
not
I
the
think-
shells.
He also has the power of total destruction. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I do think that whether they are literal humans is relatively irrelevant. It's the emotional capacity they show, and I just think that is not necessarily very effectively conveyed, because regardless of whether they are literally human or not, characters do have emotions.
Well, I mean, for example, the other two real main characters are Yase and Yakumono, or I think it's
Kurama, you mean?
Kurama, excuse me.
Yeah, Yasa had a
in-
very short, not
Yeah.
really arc, but she had a spotlight in episode 4 where we were told about there were a very interesting part to a character that she's
Yeah.
very much a very extreme juxtaposition, because she is, for one part, the most obviously non-human of the characters, given that she can arbitrarily and at a whim transform into a huge demon with fangs that wreaks havoc around the place. But at the same time, she's the most emotionally dependent and the most sentimental of the characters, because she still feels she still is that connected to the old times with her mother, and she longs for those old times, and she can't really move on.
I think that's quite common in girls, but
Yeah,
It's
but
not-
not with the juxtaposition to the more aggressive side of literally transforming to a demon. I don't see
well-
girls
well,
transforming.
the literal transformation of the demon, sure, but
Yeah,
See,
but
but
I'm not.
this is it's a thematic representation.
Yeah,
but my
I'm not
thing-
even saying it's unique. I'm just saying it's an interesting character approach. And,
I like Yase
Yeah.
the best.
Yeah,
Well-
and we learn that she's sentimental, and then we have the whole representation of that and not letting her cup go.
Well-
And then after we see the flashbacks that already imply this, the series goes out of its way to spell it out again, in case you didn't pick up on the subtlety, which is something I'm not that fond of, but never mind. And then that's basically it. Then she calms down at the end by seeing something of Koto, her mother, in the new Koto, namely that both try to accept her for who she is in her demon form, as an emotional character rather than a literal human, which is what I said earlier, which is more important are the emotions than whether they are literally human, and that both accept her in that way for what she is and try to deal with her, and that way she calmed down. And that's really all we ever got out of Yasa. That was her introduction episode, which I found very
Yeah.
weird. And then
Well-
at the end there, that weird thing happened where the world was about to collapse, and then she lost her memories for whatever reason, and then we see like 2 lines of her losing her memories, and then the next episode she randomly regained her memories for no apparent reason either.
yeah, I think the losing memories thing. I mean, I imagine that was like cut content or something. That it was something that like they had planned to make that a thing, and then they just didn't have the time for it or something. I think it's so random and weird. I
it's
can't
really
explain otherwise.
Random,
So-
weird, and off-putting, I think.
Yeah.
So there's two points that I felt I should focus on. The first off is that both Kuromaru and Yase don't matter. They're not human. I think it was Kuromaru who explicitly states that our entire beings, our entire creation was to help you find the place that you need to be to save the world based on Inari. That's why we were created. That is who we are. That is our purpose in life. So their personalities are already set in stone and are there to build up Yoei.
Yeah,
So
that
to
doesn't
call
mean
them,
they can't be interesting characters.
it's
Yeah.
true, but they're supposed to be two-dimensional characters. Second off, the memory loss of Yase was actually explained as because the city was vanishing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
and her
Yeah, but that
memories
doesn't explain the
vanish.
memory
The
loss.
memories vanished.
Yeah, right.
Because-
But it's weird for one reason because the memory is the only thing that vanished that is very clearly non-physical. All other things that vanished are physical. Unlike you telling me that part of her brain
Well-
that contained her memories vanished and she's still a functioning being, which I
It
think
means like-
biologically not makes sense. But
I look at it this way, right? You have a piece of paper, and if you rip that paper in all the way in half, that's vanishing. But if you rip it part way, like a third of the way through, that's something like you lose a certain part of your body or a certain aspect of you, in which case it's her memory.
yeah, but a physical aspect still. But Yasa didn't lose her arm or her leg, but she
No,
lost
she
her
lost her
memory.
memories instead, which was a thematical choice.
Yeah, but not a narratively sensical choice, which goes back again to prioritizing.
I don't think so
use of
because
the
it never explicitly stated this and this cannot happen in this sense. It never said if that paper is ripped 2/3 of the way or 1/3 of the way, you have to lose a physical aspect of your body, not a mental one.
But there's nothing.
means
There's
that-
there's no other parts that go missing of any sort. Like everything always disappears in
There's
its
no other
entirety.
mental-
Exactly, which means
there's
they
no
didn't pick.
other- No,
Don't you know that her memory gland, that's what disappeared? Her physical
Well,
memory
no,
gland?
no, because everything is everything disappears. Everything that disappears physically disappears at once, which means you
No,
can-
actually, it slowly, like kind of faded away into.
it kind of fades,
black
but
dust.
it physically everything fades at once. You don't have
but-
any character that their arm fades first, and then their other arm, then their body, and then their head. You had a character that fades, and they fade entirely.
Yes.
Whereas if that paper was slightly ripped, you could assume that something like the memories itself would fade instead of a physical aspect of the body, since the physical aspects of the body were all going at once.
But that makes it even more arbitrary. It's not only the only instance of something non-physical being vanishing, but it's also the only instance of a being not entirely vanishing. It's
But she entirely vanished.
no.
Yes,
Yasa very
she
much
did.
existed. She literally just had a memory loss, and she then
Yes, but then-
continued to act as a being without her memories. But she very
And then she vanished.
no, she did
Because
not.
she did vanish.
She didn't.
When she had that last conversation with Mioe as she was sitting on top of the bus, she vanished physically right after that, and it depicts her vanishing. So she did physically vanish.
Was episode 10?
9.
No, I think it was episode 9.
9. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find it right
So she-
now.
Yes, but she did physically vanish. It's just that her memories vanished before her physical entity did.
Okay, but it's weird again because at that point in that conversation, it seemed to me like they implied that she already regained her memories.
And for a split second, she might have, because when she had that conversation, she started to fade away, and that was the point where she faded. So you could, this is, drawing, this is making assumptions, but speculating. But she could have had her memories for that last split second when her entire being was connected again, but just in a connection that was destroyed, which is why she vanished.
Yeah, and that sounds again very arbitrary.
It's true.
And generally, I think that
But
that memory part is just weird.
I think there were a lot of weird parts of the show, but I feel that most of them at least, played a purpose of some kind in either the character growth or the not narrative, but the mental, the mental story, the emotional progression of the characters.
Yeah. So and generally, I think it's just weird to me that Yasa first got this bit of characterization, but we never really touched upon her again. And I think it's even worse for Kurama because we
She
really
doesn't disappear.
well no I mean she did not literally, well, at the end she vanishes there and then she comes back again. I mean, not literally disappear, but I mean she doesn't play an important role anymore. She doesn't get any more characterization. She's just left there at a constant that appears from time to time but isn't really all that relevant anymore.
Because she's not. her sole purpose in life
Yeah, right.
is, yeah.
Well, that makes me wonder why she got even that bit of characterization in the first place. I mean, they are narratively relevant characters. Both Kurama and Yase got at least one episode in the early half of the show developed to showcasing them. So that seems kind of contrary to that goal. I think it's especially bad in the case of Kurama because even though there was an episode which he could place, there was nearly nothing to really get out of his character. He wanted to go to the outside world since he was a child, and that's all there is to him.
I mean, I definitely agree that the episode 3 and 4 that so focused on Kurama and Yase respectively were kind of wasted. I don't feel that they needed to be there. They could just have gotten on with the plot earlier.
Even though I thought they were the most interesting episodes.
They were less bad than the plot
They're my
episodes.
favorite to
Yes,
watch.
they were less bad. I'll give you that. Yeah.
I felt that they were there to help build up the world and those within the world. Maybe not to a good extent, but to an extent nonetheless.
Yeah, but I think even if you say the sole purpose is for Myoe, which is
Well,
true,
I'm not-
of course.
yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're not uncompelling, which they are. And even though you can say it makes sense with respect to what the show was going for, I think that makes it less of a good show because it is not compelling. These characters are not compelling. And even Myoe alone is not compelling enough to carry this lack of otherwise non-characters.
So, Rika, you said you liked Yase, right?
Yeah, I did like Yase.
Oh, I liked her episode 4. That is,
Yeah.
and I think it's kind of sad that the show never did anything more with her. It feels
I
very
do
much
too.
like
Yeah, that's how I feel exactly as well.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that. I feel they
And
could have done more with them.
I mean,
And
I
I
didn't think
think
much of either Yase or Kurama, or honestly,
Yeah,
any of the other characters.
Kurama was especially bland, and I think that even Koto, who is supposed to be important and who isn't actually.
But I still thought Kurama's episode was pretty fun. They were like looking for the remote control, and then it was kind of an anticlimax, and it
Yeah,
kind of
but that's not related
parallel
to
to
Kurama.
whenever he found the doll. I don't know. It was like a good the episode as its own story would have been a fun episode to watch, even if I hadn't watched the entire show.
Like, to
Yeah.
me,
All 3 and 4.
like
Yeah,
the
but
best
it's
part of the entire show for me was the first episode because the whole way of telling the story was so like innovative and it was like new and it's a breath of fresh air and it had like a lot of energy to it. I feel.
Yeah.
All the rest was just
Yeah.
kind of like gags and didn't really feel like I don't know.
I think it was great setup, but I don't, and I think it was structurally interesting throughout, but I don't really think it connected all that well in the end, both narrative-wise and character-wise. And I think that even Koto, who is supposed to be a more important character than Yasuo or Kurama, is not very compelling.
Yeah.
Well-
She got her backstory episode in episode 2, and episode 2 to me was a very, well, not a good episode, not as
No,
good as
I
episode
agree.
1, and also not as good as episode 3 and 4. It was very much the down point of the first half, I feel, because even though there was an entire episode devoted to her backstory, there was not really anything I learned about Koto that made me really care.
I liked episode 2 honestly.
Well, she's just a girl who finds out that whose mother is missing, and she yearns for her mother.
She just
And,
accepts the fact that her mother is a rabbit, despite seeing a rabbit for like 5 seconds, and be like, If I look at this painting on the wall that says Kodo, and I look at this guy's face,
this
then
is
my
something
mother must be a
time.
rabbit.
Because it depicts her going there several times.
Yeah.
So this is over a period of time. How much time?
Yeah.
I don't know, but it is over a period of time. And I think that while the story, in a sense, does become not necessarily worse, but a little more confusing logically and narratively, I would argue that the story retains this continued thematic story that is well structured and connected to each other. Oh, bless you.
Thank
It's
you.
Zoomite.
But I feel that this brings it together thematically, maybe not narratively, and I wouldn't argue for the quality of the narrative story for the literal beings of a lot of the characters, but I would argue that thematically this is a very profound and very interesting story that
But like, what does it even introduce that's interesting thematically?
I think it's visualizations and depictions of just different myths and religious beliefs and ideologies coming together, and how it portrays them as one group and
Yeah, but like
family,
its
and how they
message,
can.
it's like the ending message, the take-home thing that you're supposed to get from the story. What about that is interesting?
Well, to me at least, it's interesting that, it's basically, it's an anti. No, that I can't say that. That's not true. I just
I
it
would like to say
wasn't
one thing about
necessarily.
this though, is that
Yeah,
we talked earlier about the show maybe being a bit feminist, but it seems to me
yeah,
actually that it's a bit the opposite, because one of the big themes of the show is that the women are kind of there in order to encourage the men to do their jobs. That Kodo, their mother, first got to be there because Ino is kind of lonely and doesn't want to live and whatnot. So Kodo steps into his life, and then also the young Kodo is also there to make both Myoe's realize their roles in life and whatnot. It feels
Yeah.
kind of like that they're in a supportive role for the men.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was just talking about that was an interesting choice for the time period that they were doing it based on. When I was talking about how when the Inari and the Kyoto the mother came together, but crap, I lost. But like with the ending part, what I found interesting about it, not necessarily interesting, but I felt extremely connected to the characters. I felt like I could understand their plight and what they were trying to achieve, and that's why the story to me was interesting. It's because I could connect with Koto and the emotions it conveyed, and the idea of a family, and I just find the intermingling of these religions and ideologies as an interesting message that I was trying to portray. It doesn't necessarily mean I thought the ending was interesting. I thought the ending was a good wrap to the story, but what I found truly interesting was the connections the characters had, and how I was rooting for them, and how I felt connected to them, as well as the ideologies intermingling with each other, which was one of the more hidden yet more hidden but upfront main messages of the story. And I just found that saying these religions and completely different ideologies that can coexist in kind of like a very tight knit, intimate relationship is something that I don't think has been covered. Well, it's probably been covered before, but just not in this way.
I
Not in a
think that they
sense
could
that I
have
thought.
definitely delved into like the psychology of the characters living in an isolationist world where nothing can be created or destroyed and you're like absolutely stagnant. Could have been done a lot better.
Oh, I agree.
Like we saw the characters kind of reacting to this, especially what's his Yakushimaru, not being able to kill himself, how he eventually got over it because he loved his family, and then like what's his
Well, he
name,
didn't
occupying
really
his time by he never really got over it. Yase,
No.
um, how does she react to this? She reacts to this by just dwelling over her memories and not really having any kind of will to live in the present. And then the other guy, Kurama, just builds machines and shit.
Well, I thought that was an interesting aspect though, because the young Myoe suppresses his emotions and his desire for death out of honor, and how
Does he
Ayase
though?
suppresses. She's more open about her emotions, but she still suppresses and retains them in the form of the physical items she hoards. And Kuramaru represses his emotions through the creation of things and through micromanaging the city and running it how he pleases. And so I feel like that's
he's very
connects.
open about wanting to go to the outside world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but at the
Yeah.
same time, he's open about it. Yes. Yeah, see, I'll give you that one.
But I also
I
think
was
Myoe
like-
just got tired of trying to kill himself, and he didn't need to express himself because everyone was
Yeah.
perfectly well aware of the fact that he wanted to kill himself.
I don't think so, actually. I don't think the modern people in the Looking Glass City were aware of this extreme desire to kill himself. I mean, it seemed to come as a shock to Koto, the daughter, when he said, "I want you to kill me." And she took this as a shocked reaction, though she's had very intimate discussions with both the people. You could consider Myoe, the two girls, to be closest with. She's had discussions with them about Myoe before, and they never conveyed this message to him
That's
because
true.
he suppressed it from them. So I feel that he did suppress these emotions, and though his parents knew about it, which is why they created Kuramaru and Yase to keep him company so that those desires would be repressed, he didn't. He still repressed them from everybody else in the Looking Glass City.
I
Which
think
then,
it's in the first episode. He has a phone call with I assume Kurama, or at least one of the siblings. Where it is commented on if he doesn't want to do his job as the head priest, why he just doesn't quit, and then he said that he simply can't do that precisely
yeah,
because of duty and obligation.
But I
yeah,
mean, no. I mean, he tries to throw away these beads several times, and every single time they return to him. Right? I mean, it's a curse. I mean, he can't get rid of them,
yeah.
even if he tried to. I mean, I don't think it has anything to do with honor obligation.
Yeah.
I think the one time I remember him trying to throw them away was with Inari there. When he threw them down, he said, "I don't want these. Why did you give them to me?"
And then they come
returned
back
to his hand.
immediately, so at least we know that
Yeah.
he can't do it physically,
Yeah.
even if he wanted to.
Not because of obligation, but because of necessity.
Yeah. But I would say it's also out of obligation because he realizes that if he vanishes with these beads, there will be no one to continue creating things throughout history. There will be no one to save the world if it ever
He
came
does
to such a dire point.
he doesn't create anything either way. Everything is already created. Creation is
Yeah.
He
already
doesn't, but he realizes that without these beads, if something were to happen,
I mean, that's not in the
Well,
story,
nothing can be
though. I
done
mean,
about
you can interpret it that way if you want, but that's.
I don't think I don't see why anything would happen.
I mean, obviously something did.
And also,
no,
all he does
no,
with the beads
because
is
he
just kind
never
of like
really
throw
died.
around Koto.
Right, what did you say, Thor?
I mean, we never saw what would happen if he just died with the beads, so you
Well,
can't say that.
it would be assumed that the world would end
Why?
because Inari had already set in motion the stages for the world to end, which even if Mioe vanished, couldn't be stopped by anyone aside from the person with those beads, in which case Mioe would be the one needed to stop it. And we
No,
also know that,
the apocalypse is a completely different concept, though.
but it relates because both of them want death, and if they're both gone, no one has those beads to continue creating life. And
Yeah,
But I
Inari
thought
has
he said
already,
that life could create itself beyond his control, and he thought it was just
except
Yeah.
if it's destroyed, gone forever.
It won't
Because
be
obviously,
destroyed by the absence. The thing that is actively threatening to destroy life is Koto breaking the barrier. That's the only.
except Inari had planned for Koto to break that barrier way before. He had planned to pass on these beads and to end the world and
No.
force Mioe. He did. You concurred earlier that Mioe had when he basically adopted, or Inari had when he adopted Mioe, set into motion his plan to force Mioe to take over his position, which was
Yeah.
to end the world
No,
and
it
force Mioe to
it
save it.
was to continue being the god of creation.
If it was to continue being the god of creation, why would he want to vanish and why did he give Mioe the beads?
And he wants Myoe to be the god of creation.
Yes, and to
Yeah.
do that, he was going to force Mioe to accept it by
Yeah,
forcing
right.
him to save the world, which he would have to end the world or put it in a neo-apocalyptic state for Mioe to save it, which was
Yeah,
his
right.
plan all along. Which means
But-
the second he adopted Mioe, his goal was to end the world.
No, he doesn't want to end the world. That is merely
Well,
a
not
means
not
to make
end the world, but you get it. His idea is to start the end of the world and force Mioe to stop it.
Yeah, right. But it clearly means his end goal is not the end of the world, but rather the opposite.
It's true, but his end goal has him dying, along with the world with quotes around that he had created as Mioe takes over and saves it and rebuilds it.
Yeah, he's literally Itachi.
Yeah, but without the world having ended or come close to ending, he knew that Mioe would not have taken Mioe would not have continued to hold on to the beads. He knew he had to force Mioe to save the world.
Well, he didn't even try talking to him. I don't know if he knew that he had to force them.
Well, yeah, and that goes back to the concept of repressed emotions and feelings. Because he didn't talk to anybody about this. Which
I mean,
is
that's
why
I found
often-
Itachi a much more compelling character than Inari.
that's because Itachi gets like 500 episodes to grow.
Yeah, but they could have done it in this amount of time.
They probably could have. But I don't hold it against them that they didn't. I've seen much more shallower shows in 12 episodes or 26 episodes than I have in this 10 episode series. I've seen a lot of them that are just so
Yeah,
much more
yeah.
shallow.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I have to hand it to
Anime
this
sucks,
show.
so.
Anime sucks. Like, this show just has so many thematic values to it. It has so much imagery that has been set and chosen to be very specific. And while the logical narrative isn't necessarily the most concrete, I felt that the moral narrative and the message it tried to convey was much more concrete in the way they did so.
So one little thing. Sorry, Falco, you here, go.
I just want to say I don't care for themes. I care for how themes are incorporated into characters and narrative.
Yeah.
For me, it's more of how much I care for the characters and how interesting I find the morals and ideas the show is trying to convey. For example, Shigofumi is another anime I do rather enjoy. And the characters in that show aren't necessarily the best. In fact, most of them are rather shallow. But the idea and the concepts the show tries to convey and bring in as a message were what entertained me, what interested me in the story itself, and which is why I liked the show. And the same thing goes to Kyousougiga. The morals and ideas and imagery it brought with it were enough to make me enjoy the show, even though it had its number of flaws.
So one theme, this whole thing about Inari wanting to die, is that we talked earlier about how Inari, the father, and his brother is a bit like the Trinity. And what's interesting there is that Jesus, of course, did die. And I wonder if there's anything to come after there.
That's actually an interesting point. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, Jesus did die.
But he was resurrected.
I don't really see how
Actually,
his
Inari was
structure
actually
parallels the
resurrected as
Trinity.
well.
yeah, he wasn't resurrected in a sense. I was thinking that too.
Inari was resurrected, literally. At least he said so. And I mean, from the last point we saw him in episode 1 to the point where we see him again in episode 2 with Koto, his physical form very obviously changed.
Right.
I think
As a different
that
body.
yeah, I think
He's
that
much
connects
smaller.
to having Koto.
Yeah, but I'm not sure what was caused this body change. And at one point in the
Oh,
show,
well,
Inari literally mentioned being resurrected in
Yeah.
connection to having this new body. He literally mentioned that.
well, my speculation is that it was because of the young Koto when, like, just how the mother gave up a lot of her powers to Koto, the child. The father did so too, in which case he had, from his age, digressed. He went back in time, age-wise, and became younger, whereas the mother just started to fade, and her presence became very weak. And his resurrection, per se, was when he had that child, and that child was, as he claimed, a new version of him.
I'm not saying it's bad speculation, but it's speculation. I mean, there's nothing in the show that
It is-
supports
it-
the
it is
idea that he
speculation.
would.
I,
Right.
Yeah, no,
I mean,
I-
I mean, I'm just quite impatient with this speculation. Sorry, Rika.
I don't find it to be a parallel to the Trinity at all. And also, I think that the three animals representing God being a representation of the Trinity is extremely shallow as well.
Yeah.
Mainly just because of the way that the Trinity exists. Three separate beings that are equal, but at the same time, it's like three separate beings that are the same. So, yes, they're like one entity, and there are three things, but that's pretty much as deep as it goes with regards to like Christian mythos. And then also for what's his name, Yakushimaru, to represent Jesus or whatever, that doesn't exactly fit.
No,
because
I'm thinking
No, no, no,
Inari,
Inari. Yeah.
the first priest.
Inari, yeah, Inari representing Jesus also doesn't really fit. For one thing, who would be God
Yeah.
and the
No,
Holy
God,
Spirit.
God, we know who would be, right? That would be the three
Yeah,
animals,
the
right?
father.
Yes, and then who would the Holy Spirit?
He would
Holy
be the
Spirit-
leader of the
chief
church, the leader of
Yeah,
the
but
spirit.
the Holy Spirit in Christianity is basically the God that connects humans to God. It's who you can
And he
speak
does.
to.
Right. I
But
mean,
not in the same sense. It's like the Holy Spirit is omnipresent, so able to speak to everyone at once.
Yeah.
He's also the
Yeah.
reason why anyone does good things or things in the name of God, because God's able to speak to people.
Yeah.
and it's the evidence that yeah. But like for example, if you have the Pentecost, which is the birth of the church, which is where the Holy Spirit enters into the bodies of the
Yeah.
disciples and gives them the ability to talk these languages. I do feel that the Holy Spirit is quite closely connected to the church.
Yeah, it is.
But comparing Inari to Jesus is absolutely asinine.
Yeah. For one thing, he never died. Like,
No, I mean he gets reborn as stated in the show, and Jesus gets reborn.
yeah.
But that's not the issue. The issue is that Jesus died for your sins, and
Yeah,
Inari
yeah.
is the most narcissistic guy in the entire
So
series.
that much is true, but there's also the fact that Inari disappears in some sense, and when he comes back, that will herald the beginning of the end, which is the same as Jesus, in that Jesus dies, and when Jesus comes back, that's Doomsday.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. But
So
they're-
it's not a one-to-one correlation, but I do not agree that it's completely asinine.
I think
mean,
it's completely asinine.
a character
Especially
wise,
because Jesus was also sinless and faultless, and that's the reason why his sacrifice meant that everyone else could be saved. You know, he died in their stead, so to speak. Whereas Inari created all of his own problems, and his leaving was of his own choosing, as opposed to Jesus, who was sacrificed by the Lord for people. So it's completely opposite the entire reason why he died and was reborn, and also the effects of where he died and was reborn.
So certainly there are differences. I do not dispute that.
Yeah, so I think that you can't really even make the correlation because
All right. I still think I
I
can.
mean you can say that there are three characters. That's about as
Yeah.
deep as you're gonna go.
Well, I think that it could be a connection. I mean, I was once
Everything else is just coincidence.
No,
Well,
I don't.
I
I
mean-
feel that the father splitting himself into three things is like a very clear, like
Yeah.
signpost that says like, hey, there's something that should be ringing a bell here, even if it is very shallow. But like,
Yeah.
there's no other reason for the father to split him into three animals, other than maybe
I mean-
there's reference to the very earliest manga
Yeah,
thing.
But like to me, that's
Well,
the same as the
no.
reference to Alice in the Wonderland, where it's just kind of like, hey, look, this is they go to another world. Remember Alice in the Wonderland? It's like, hey, there's God. He's three animals. You remember when God was three things? Like there's
I'm not saying it's
So
deep.
what?
I do not like this
It's
show. I'm just
stylistic,
saying that there is like
stylistic.
a clear
Um,
reference
I
to the
think
Trinity, in my opinion.
I think with the problem with because it you can relate the rabbit, the monkey, and the frog to the Chojo Jinbotsu Giga, but at the same time, I think there was a fourth, maybe a fifth character in that story. In which case, you could also say that they could have just made it dozens of those figures based on the image that they drew from.
The
which
two
they
other
didn't.
characters wouldn't happen to be a bunny and a fox, would it?
I think it was a fox. Yeah.
Because then that's all the five there are five animals in
Yeah.
the show, right? Inari is a
Yeah.
fox. Then there's the three animals that the father is, and then there's the bunny that Kodo is.
Yeah.
Although then there are two bunnies. I guess there's a hare and a bunny, maybe. I don't know. What do you make of Inari being a fox? Do you think there's anything interesting there to talk about? Do you think that who what animal is?
I mean, the only thing aside from maybe that picture that I can think of is that he's very cunning and he keeps to himself because he had this master plan planned out and he let it play out the way he wanted it to play out.
Foxes are
telling other people.
supposedly tricksters as well.
Yeah,
And they also
the tricksters and cunning.
bunnies. Yeah. Well, I mean, you can be cunning and not be a trickster. So those are like the two.
Yeah.
Aiden, could you write that title in the chat?
Yes.
I would-
Actually, I'll just link. I think Phil got linked in Google on it.
Oh, did he?
You also
No,
foxes
you didn't.
eat rabbits. I just like to say that.
Yeah, I know. Just like I'm not gonna say.
I mean, basically,
Also, if you've ever seen Zootopia, this story is basically just Zootopia retold.
Zootopia. Except this was before Zootopia.
A fox falls in love with a rabbit. Yeah.
Let me just get you the Wikipedia page for it.
Four did not link that article.
No, he didn't. He linked something else. That's the Wikipedia page for it.
Thank you.
yeah. So I think in a sense, Inari is the sole cause of why everything even happens in the first place. His narcissism in particular.
Yeah.
If you look at it that way, it's a very monocausal story, actually.
All right. Does anyone else have a subject they'd like to address?
I think I covered all of mine.
Yeah.
I just like to say this anime sucks.
Shut up. You're the person who couldn't finish the last like 4 episodes without talking to a girl
Well,
and not paying attention.
That's how bad it was.
Attention. Oof, but he didn't say it was bad at that point. He just said, "Yeah, I was just talking with."
No, but this is a
somebody."
clear sign of it being bad. It couldn't capture his attention.
Yeah,
it's more
see,
like
I
it
didn't
was
want to
too
attribute
easy
it to
for
the anime because I was like, well, maybe I'm just getting distracted because like I'm an easily distractible person, but at the same time, like it was really hard for me to finish every episode.
Like
So
I will
bad.
say that I feel there's a difference between a show giving enough hints so that a possible interpretation can be constructed and a show actually telling you things. And I prefer it when the show actually makes at least a couple of things clear. I don't
Yeah,
like all these
I
fan
actually
theories.
like it the more, not necessarily if they leave everything up to speculation, but I do enjoy when they leave it up to speculation because people can have different views on what things actually mean and how things actually progress.
I feel there's a difference
Yeah,
between leaving it up to speculation and leaving it up to interpretation. I feel like there's like a
Yes.
degree of difference there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That sounds very agreeable. I think there's a degree between leaving just enough hints to make sense of something and just leaving something open.
Have you
Oh,
ever
Also,
seen
I was
Hibiki
thinking of like
from
Mononoke, which has this very different way of showing things, and you
And
also have
also,
to
something
piece
else
things
I'd like to
together.
say is that not only does it leave a lot of things up to interpretation, but it's not like it particularly leaves a lot up to the imagination either.
Yeah.
Like in a show like Serial Experiments Lane, where almost
was
all of
also
it is
thinking
left
about
up to
Lane.
interpretation. It's like very vague in everything it's trying to say, but at the same time, it's very inspiring towards the imagination because it doesn't really have kind of conclusions. You can just kind of make up the story as you see fit. Whereas this one, it has. I'm hearing my echo, but
yeah.
I was
I don't
actually
think it's
also
very
thinking
inspiring
about
towards the
Lane,
imagination.
because Lane also does something when we talk about the difference between leaving something up to speculation and interpretation, and I think Lane also falls into the latter category, where
Yeah.
the entire premise of the show is continuously undermined by every exploration of the plot it undergoes. And by
Yes.
the end, the entire premise of the show seems very circular and unreasonable, and there is really no way to make sense of it. And some do take this as up to interpretation. But I just think it's a flaw in the writing
Right.
because there is clearly a hole there. There's not where the show doesn't give us any tools to think about it or to think about how to fill it.
Yeah.
I definitely there are a bunch of plot holes, just like simple plot holes that don't make sense.
Yeah, there are simple plot holes that don't make sense.
All right, how about I stop recording now, and then we can maybe
Yeah.
plan ahead for the next podcast.
Sounds
Okay.
good to me.